A 7-year-old girl grabs the back of a biker's leather vest in a frozen roadside diner and whispers 3 words that change everything. He's hunting me. Outside, a gray sedan crawls through falling snow. Inside, a man who lost his own daughter stands between a trembling child and a predator wearing an expensive smile. What happens next will shatter everything you think you know about justice, about protection, and about the men society calls outlaws. Because when Darian Voss and the Black Wolves discover Mila wasn't the only child trapped inside that house, they cross a line no badge, no courtroom, and no political connection can push them back from. Stay with me until the very end of this one. If this story hits you the way I think it will, drop a like, leave a comment, tell me what city you're watching from tonight. Let's ride. The neon sign above Kessler's Diner had been dying for 3 years. Half the letters flickered in lazy orange pulses, the other half stayed dark. So from the highway, it read only KSERs in broken Morse code against the December sky. Snow fell sideways across the parking lot in thin sheets that hissed against the blacktop. 2 18-wheelers sat idling at the far end. A rusted Dodge pickup with a cracked windshield occupied the handicap spot. And closest to the door, angled like it owned the curb, a flat black 2003 Harley-Davidson Road King with no chrome, no frills, and a faded Black Wolves MC patch stitched onto the saddlebag. Darian Voss pushed through the diner door at 7 minutes past 9. Cold followed him inside like a dog that wouldn't leave. He didn't stomp the snow off his boots. He didn't unzip his leather jacket. He walked past the counter, past the trucker hunched over chili and a phone screen, past the waitress refilling the coffee station, and dropped into the last booth against the back wall where the overhead light had burned out months ago and nobody bothered replacing it. He sat with his back to the corner. Both exits visible. Hands flat on the table until the coffee came. Old habits. The kind that kept you alive in Fallujah and kept you functional in the 17 years since. The waitress was mid-50s, blonde roots showing beneath a bad dye job. Her name tag said Cheryl. She set down a white mug without asking what he wanted and filled it 3/4 full from a pot that smelled like it had been sitting since the dinner rush ended 2 hours ago. "Kitchen closes at 10, she said. "Just this." She looked at the patches on his vest, looked at the scars across his knuckles, looked at his eyes last, which was smart because most people looked at his eyes first and decided everything else about him from there. Gray-green, deep-set, hollow in the way that empty rooms are hollow. Not angry, just uninhabited. Cheryl walked away without another word. Darian wrapped both hands around the mug. The ceramic was too hot. He didn't adjust his grip. Pain was just temperature. Temperature was just information. He'd learned to process information without reacting to it a long time ago in a desert operating room where a Navy corpsman pulled shrapnel from his left thigh while he counted ceiling tiles and breathed through clenched teeth. The coffee tasted burnt. He drank it anyway. Outside, the snow thickened. Wind pressed against the plate glass windows hard enough to make the frames creak. The trucker at the counter paid his bill and walked out, letting a gust of frozen air sweep napkins off 3 tables. Then the diner was nearly empty. Cheryl, a cook somewhere behind the kitchen partition, clanking pans. Darian, and the girl. He didn't see her at first. She came from the direction of the restroom, small enough to pass below the sightline of the booth dividers. 7 years old, maybe 8, brown hair matted and tangled, hanging past thin shoulders. A pink jacket 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up and still covering her hands, jeans with mud on the knees, sneakers that had been white once, a long time ago. She moved along the wall like she was trying to become part of it. Quick, darting steps. Head down, eyes scanning. Darian watched her without turning his head. She reached his booth and stopped. Stood there for 4 full seconds, breathing fast, shallow breaths that fogged the air between them because the heating system in this place was barely holding its own against the winter outside. Then she did something that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. She grabbed the back of his leather vest with both small hands and pressed herself against his side like he was a wall between her and the rest of the world. "He's hunting me." 3 words. Whispered. Not dramatic, not performed. The voice of a child who had learned that screaming didn't help. Darian didn't move, didn't look down at her. He looked at the front door of the diner instead, looked at the parking lot through the plate glass, the two trucks, the pickup, his Harley, and a gray sedan that hadn't been there 60 seconds ago, idling near the entrance with its headlights still on, wipers pushing snow off the windshield in slow, mechanical arcs. "Where'd you come from?" he asked, voice low. Not gentle exactly, but controlled, the way you talk to a frightened animal when sudden kindness would scare it worse than silence. "The bathroom window. I climbed through." "From where before that?" She didn't answer. Her fingers tightened on his vest. He could feel them trembling through the leather. Cheryl came back with the coffee pot, stopped 3 feet from the booth, when she saw the girl pressed against Darian's side. Her expression shifted through confusion, suspicion, and something protective in rapid sequence. "Whose child is that?" "Working on it," Darian said. "You can't just—" "Cheryl." He said her name like a period at the end of a sentence. "Get her something warm to drink, not coffee, whatever you've got, and stay behind the counter." The waitress opened her mouth, closed it, looked at the girl, looked at the front door. Something in the parking lot caught her attention because her face changed again, this time to a shade of discomfort that lived closer to fear. She set the coffee pot on the table and walked back to the counter without arguing. The front door opened. Cold air hit first, then footsteps, dress shoes on wet tile, a sound that didn't belong in a trucker diner at 9 o'clock on a December night. The man who entered was mid-40s, tall, well-built beneath a charcoal overcoat that cost more than everything else in the building combined. Dark hair combed back with precision, clean-shaven, a face built for conference rooms and handshake photographs. He smiled as he entered, and the smile was expensive too, practiced. The kind that worked on juries and school boards and women at fundraising galas. He paused inside the doorway, scanning the diner with an ease that suggested he was accustomed to walking into rooms and owning them. His eyes found the girl. Mila. His voice carried warmth like a furnace carries heat, manufactured, mechanical, on a timer. "There you are, sweetheart. You scared me to death." The girl's entire body went rigid against Darian's side. Not the stiffness of surprise. The stiffness of a creature that knows the trap has found it again. Darian set his coffee mug down. The man approached the booth with his hands open, palms forward, the universal gesture of harmlessness that Darian had seen insurgent commanders use before ordering executions. "I'm sorry about this," the man said, addressing Darian directly now, smiling wider. "She's my foster daughter. She has episodes, runs off. Her therapist says it's attachment disorder." He extended a hand. "Richard Talman." Darian didn't take it. "She says you're hunting her." A flicker behind the eyes, brief, controlled, the way a card player adjusts when the wrong card hits the table. "Like I said, episodes. She fabricates stories. It's part of the condition." He lowered his hand slowly, the smile dimming by a careful fraction to communicate patience and concern. "I just need to take her home." "No." The words sat in the air like a dropped stone. Richard Talman tilted his head. "Excuse me?" "She stays." "Sir, I understand this looks unusual, but I'm her legal guardian. I have documentation in my car if you need—" "She stays." The smile died. What replaced it was something older, harder, and far more honest. A tightness around the jaw, a stillness in the shoulders, the posture of a man recalculating because force was suddenly on the table and he hadn't planned for it. "I don't want trouble," Talman said. "Then leave." "I'm not leaving without my daughter." Darian stood. The booth bench scraped against the floor with a sound that cut through the quiet diner like a knife across glass. At 6'2", he had 3 inches on Talman. The vest hung open over a black thermal shirt, and the patches across the leather told a story that most civilians couldn't read, but every predator understood instinctively. Sergeant-at-Arms. Black Wolves MC. The enforcer patch sat below the left pocket, faded from years of rain and road dust and blood that never fully washed out. "She's not your daughter," Darian said. He didn't say it because he had evidence. He didn't say it because he'd run a background check or recognized the man from a news report, or had any reason beyond what 17 years of identifying threats had beaten into his nervous system. He said it because the girl behind him was shaking the way his daughter used to shake during thunderstorms. And his daughter had never shaken that way because of strangers. She had shaken that way because of something inside the house. And then his daughter was dead. And his wife. And the man driving the pickup truck that crossed the center line on Route 9 at 11:47 on a Tuesday night walked away from the crash without a scratch and served 14 months before parole. And Darian had spent every day since then turning himself into something that couldn't feel enough to break again. But this girl with the matted hair and the too big jacket and the hands that gripped his vest like it was the last solid thing in the world. He felt something. He hated himself for it. Talman took one step back. His eyes moved to Cheryl behind the counter, to the kitchen partition, to the exits, calculating. "I'm going to call the police," he said evenly. "This is a custody matter. You're interfering with... Call them." That stopped him. Predators expected resistance. They expected aggression, panic, threats, responses they could use, leverage, twist into narratives that served them. They didn't expect cooperation with law enforcement from a man wearing an outlaw motorcycle club vest. The calculation behind Talman's eyes shifted again, and for the first time, something that looked like genuine unease crossed his features. He pulled a phone from his coat pocket, held it up. "I'm calling." "I heard you the first time." Talman stared at Darian for a long moment. Then he turned and walked back out through the front door into the snow. The gray sedan sat idling. He got inside. The door closed. The car didn't move. Darian sat back down. He didn't look at the girl immediately. He reached for his coffee instead, drank the rest of it even though it had gone cold, and set the mug down with a click that sounded too loud in the silence. "Mila." She flinched at her own name. "That's your name? Mila?" A nod, small, almost invisible. "He's not going to touch you tonight. You understand that?" Another nod. "I need you to sit down across from me. Can you do that?" She released his vest one finger at a time, as if letting go of a rope over a canyon, slid into the opposite bench, drew her knees up to her chest inside the oversized jacket, so she became a small pink ball of fabric and fear. Her eyes were brown, enormous, and old in the way that no 7-year-old's eyes should ever be old. Cheryl appeared with a cup of hot chocolate, set it in front of the girl without a word, looked at Darian with a question she didn't ask out loud. He gave a single nod that meant stay close and stay quiet, and she retreated again. "Mila, I'm going to make a phone call, not to the police, to people I trust, okay?" She picked up the hot chocolate with both hands, blew on it. The steam rose in thin curls that caught the flickering neon light through the window. "Okay," she whispered. Darian pulled a phone from his jacket, flipped it open. Not a smartphone. A battered prepaid flip phone held together with electrical tape and habit. He dialed a number from memory. 2 rings. "Yeah." The voice on the other end belonged to Cole Brecker, Vice President, Black Wolves MC, Colorado. Chapter: 53 years old, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a rebuilt left knee, a rebuilt marriage, and a moral code carved from granite and cemented with loss. "It's Voss. I know who it is. It's 9:30 on a Wednesday. I'm at Kessler's. Exit 14. I need bodies." Silence on the line, not hesitation, assessment. Cole Brecker didn't ask unnecessary questions the way civilians did. He didn't need context or explanations or reassurance. He needed coordinates, numbers, and threat level. "How many?" "As many as can ride in the cold." "Threat level?" Darian looked through the window at the gray sedan, still idling, still watching. "Unknown, 1 male, expensive, claiming legal custody of a kid who says he's hunting her. He's parked outside deciding what to do." "Kid hurt?" "Scared, not visibly injured. That might change if I let him leave with her." 20 minutes. The line went dead. Darian set the phone on the table, looked at Mila. She had stopped blowing on the hot chocolate and was just holding it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, staring at the marshmallow melting on the surface with the fixed concentration of a child who had learned to focus on small things to avoid thinking about large ones. "Mila, how long have you been with him?" "Since September." "Where are your parents?" "My mom is in a place, a hospital, for her head." "Your dad?" "I don't have one." The words came flat, rehearsed. The kind of answers a child gives when they've been asked so many times by so many caseworkers and strangers and system people that the truth becomes a script, recited without feeling. Because feeling takes energy, and energy is a currency that runs out when you're 7 and the world has already spent most of yours. Did he hurt you? She looked up, not at his face, at the patches on his vest, at the wolf emblem stitched in black thread on the chest panel, at the word enforcer beneath it. Are you a bad guy? Some people think so. Do you hurt kids? Something cracked inside Darian Voss. Hairline fracture. Invisible. The kind that wouldn't show on any scan but changed the load-bearing capacity of the structure permanently. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands wrapped around the empty mug. No, he said. I don't hurt kids. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Whatever she was looking for, she found it or decided to pretend she had, because the tension in her shoulders eased by a fraction, and she took the first actual sip of the hot chocolate. He locks the door at night, she said quietly. From the outside. Darian's jaw tightened. He felt his pulse in his temples, slow and steady, the way it used to pulse before combat. Not faster, slower, the body shifting into a lower gear, conserving energy, preparing for sustained effort rather than explosive reaction. Your door. All of them. All of the other kids' doors, too. The diner hummed with refrigerator noise and wind against glass. Somewhere behind the kitchen wall, the cook dropped a metal pan and swore. The neon sign outside popped and buzzed and threw a wash of orange light across the snow that made it look like the parking lot was on fire. How many other kids? Mila held up 4 fingers. Darian closed his eyes, opened them. The gray sedan was still there. Richard Talman was still inside it, still deciding, still calculating. A man who locked children's doors from the outside and wore $1,000 overcoats and had documentation ready in his car because he'd planned for this scenario, had rehearsed for the possibility that one of them might run. The sound reached them before the lights did. A low, rolling thunder that built from the south, growing louder in layers the way a storm builds. First a vibration in the floor, then a tremor in the coffee mug, then a full-throated roar that made the windows rattle and the salt shaker on the table walk a 1/4 inch to the left. Headlights appeared on the highway. Not one set. Not 2. A convoy. A wall of light cutting through the snowfall, golden and relentless, each beam slightly different in height and angle, because no 2 bikes in the Black Wolves fleet matched. They weren't a corporation. They weren't a brand. They were an accumulation of damaged men on damaged machines who had found something worth riding through the cold for. They came off the exit ramp in single file, engines echoing off the concrete overpass, then spread across the parking lot in a formation that looked chaotic but wasn't. 23 motorcycles, 23 riders, 23 men who had been sitting in living rooms and garages and clubhouses 15 minutes ago and were now here, in the snow, at a diner on exit 14, because Darian Voss had said the word. The gray sedan's engine revved. Its tires spun briefly on the icy asphalt. Then it went still again. Cole Brecker was the first one through the door. Heavy-set, barrel-chested, a gray beard that reached his collarbone and a limp from the knee that never healed right. He wore the same cut he'd worn for 20 years. Leather so aged it looked like tree bark, patches faded by sun and rain and stories nobody told sober. He scanned the diner the way he scanned everything. Entries, exits, threats, non-combatants. His eyes found Mila. Something passed across his face. Not pity, not sentimentality, recognition. The look of a man who had seen frightened children in Kandahar and Helmand province and had spent the rest of his life trying to unsee them. That her? Darian nodded. Cole pulled a chair from an empty table and sat down at the end of the booth, blocking the aisle. Not threatening the girl, shielding her. He didn't introduce himself, didn't smile, just sat there like a wall with a heartbeat. Other riders filed in. Some stood near the counter, others positioned themselves near the windows. A few stayed outside in the parking lot, straddling their bikes with engines idling, watching the gray sedan through falling snow. No one spoke above a murmur. No one raised a voice. The diner filled with the smell of wet leather, cold air, engine exhaust, and the particular silence of men who knew how to wait. Cheryl stood behind the counter with the coffee pot in her hand and a look on her face that hovered between terror and something that might have been relief. She started pouring mugs without being asked. Mila stared at the riders, at the leather and the patches and the boots and the scarred hands wrapped around coffee mugs. She looked at Darian. "Are they all with you?" "Yeah." "Are they going to hurt him?" "No." "Then what are they going to do?" Darian looked at Cole. Cole looked back. Between them passed 17 years of shared violence, shared loss, shared silence on long night rides where the road was the only therapist either of them could afford. "They're going to make sure nobody hurts you," Darian said. Outside, the gray sedan's driver's side door opened. Richard Talman stepped out into the snow. He stood beside his car, looking at the wall of motorcycles and men surrounding the diner, and for the first time his face showed something unguarded. Not fear exactly. Recalculation. The expression of a man whose contingency plans didn't include this variable. He pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke briefly, then got back in the car. The sedan pulled out of the parking lot, turned onto the highway, disappeared into the snowfall heading east. Nobody in the diner relaxed. "He'll be back," Cole said. "Men like that always come back, just with bigger tools." Darian looked at Mila. She was holding the hot chocolate again, but she wasn't drinking it. She was watching the highway through the window where the sedan had vanished, and her face carried the look of someone who had seen exits close before. "Mila," he said, "you said there are 4 other kids." She nodded. "In the house." Another nod. "Where's the house?" She blinked, bit her lip. A child's version of the calculation every survivor makes, the one between the danger of speaking and the danger of silence. Between the monster you know and the strangers who say they'll protect you, who might mean it, who might not, who might be gone tomorrow, while the monster is always, always there. "If I tell you," she said, and her voice was so quiet that Cole leaned forward to hear it, "he'll know I told, and then the others will get punished. He says that. He says if one talks, the rest pay." The diner was silent except for the wind and the drip of a faucet behind the counter and the idling engines outside in the cold. Darian Voss sat across from a 7-year-old girl in a dying diner on a frozen highway, and he felt the fracture inside him widen. Not break. Widen. The way fault lines shift before earthquakes. He thought about his daughter, about the car seat in the wreckage, about the way the paramedics' hands had shaken, about the sound his own voice had made when it stopped being a voice and became something else entirely. He reached across the table, not to touch her, just to place his open hand on the surface between them, palm up, scarred, and calloused, and covered in old road burns and tattoo ink. "Nobody's going to punish anyone," he said. "Not tonight. Not anymore." Mila looked at his hand, looked at his face, looked at the riders filling the diner, these broken, scarred, leather-wrapped men who had ridden through a snowstorm for a phone call. She took a breath. "It's on Miller Road," she said, "past the grain elevator, the house with the blue door. He keeps it locked, always locked. There's a woman inside, too. She watches us when he's gone. Her name is Donna. She pretends to be nice when people visit." Cole already had his phone out. Darian shook his head. "Not yet." "Voss, we call the cops now. Talman gets a lawyer on scene before anyone with a badge gets past the front door. Kids disappear into the system. Evidence gets scrubbed. We've seen this before." "So what's the play?" Darian looked out the window at the parking lot full of idling Harleys, their exhaust rising through the snow like breath from sleeping animals. 23 men, 23 sets of eyes. Not enough for war. More than enough for witness. "We go to Miller Road," he said. "We park on the street. We don't touch anything. We don't enter. We don't threaten. We just stand there. Every one of us. Visible. And we call the cops with 23 witnesses ready to testify that we saw what we saw." Cole studied him. "And if Talman gets there first, then we don't let him inside." "That's a line, Voss." "I know what it is." The 2 men looked at each other across the booth, where a little girl sat with a half-finished hot chocolate, and the weight of the decision pressed down on them both like altitude. On one side, the law, the system, the proper channels that had failed every child Darian Voss had ever tried to help. On the other, direct action, criminal exposure, the risk of losing everything the club had built over 2 decades of riding and burying and surviving. Cole stood up. The chair scraped against the tile. He zipped his jacket to the throat and looked at Mila one more time. Miller Road, he repeated, past the grain elevator. Blue door. Blue door, she whispered. Cole walked toward the front entrance, stopped, turned back. Voss, what about the girl? Darian looked down at Mila. She was looking up at him with those ancient, enormous brown eyes, and in them he saw the one thing he'd been running from for 6 years. Trust, unearned, terrified, desperate trust from a child who had no reason to give it and nothing left to protect herself with if he failed. She stays with me, he said. Cole nodded once, pushed through the door. Cold air rushed in. Outside, engines roared to life one after another, a chain reaction of thunder that shook the windows and vibrated through the floor and made the hot chocolate tremble in its cup. Mila pressed her hands flat against the table to steady herself. Are we going to the house? She asked. Not you, just them. But the others, we're going to get them out, Mila. She looked at him, searching, testing, that terrible, careful scrutiny of a child who has been lied to by every adult who ever mattered. Promise? The word hit him like a round to the chest. He thought about his daughter in the car seat, about the promise he'd made that morning to pick her up from daycare, about the phone call he'd taken instead, the club business that kept him 20 minutes late, the 20 minutes that put his wife and daughter on Route 9 at the exact moment a man with a blood alcohol of 0.19 crossed the center line. He had promised. He had failed. And now a 7-year-old girl in a roadside diner was asking him to promise again. And every scar on his body, every sleepless night, every mile of empty highway he'd ridden trying to outrun the grief told him that promises were things he broke. But the girl was looking at him. And outside, 23 engines waited. And somewhere on Miller Road, behind a blue door that was always locked, 4 children sat in the dark wondering if anyone was coming. Yeah, Darian Voss said. I promise. The engines roared. The convoy pulled out of the parking lot one by one, headlights slicing through the blizzard, heading east toward Miller Road. Darian watched them go from the diner window. His phone buzzed. A text from Cole. Talman's sedan. Spotted heading east on Route 7. Same direction. Darian stood up, looked at Cheryl. Lock the door behind us. Don't open it for anyone you don't know. Where are you taking that child? Somewhere he can't reach. He looked down at Mila, extended his hand. She took it. Her fingers were cold and small and fit inside his fist like a key inside a lock. And for a moment the diner and the snow and the neon and the whole broken machinery of the world fell away. And there was only this, a damaged man and a frightened child walking toward a motorcycle in a blizzard, heading toward a house on Miller Road where 4 more children waited behind a door that was always, always locked. And Richard Talman was already on his way there. The snow had turned mean by the time Darian pulled the Road King onto Route 7, not the soft, postcard kind that settled on fences and mailboxes. This was horizontal ice, driven by a wind that came off the plains with nothing between it and the highway, but 200 miles of frozen farmland. It hit the left side of his face like ground glass. He squinted against it and kept the throttle steady at 45, which was 10 miles an hour faster than smart and 20 slower than he wanted. Mila sat behind him, not on the passenger pegs. Her legs were too short to reach them. She sat on the main seat with her arms locked around his waist and her face buried in the back of his leather vest, and she weighed almost nothing. He could feel her ribs through the pink jacket, could feel her heartbeat against his spine, fast and arrhythmic, a small drum that hadn't found its rhythm yet. He shouldn't have put her on the bike. He knew that. Every rule, every protocol, every ounce of common sense told him that you don't put a 7-year-old on a Harley in a blizzard on a 2-lane highway at night. But the alternatives were worse. Leave her at the diner with Cheryl, a stranger, behind a door that locked from the inside but wouldn't stop a man with Talman's resources. Call the police and hand her over to the same system that placed her with Talman in the first place. Wait for someone else to solve the problem, the way someone else always solved the problem. Except they never actually solved it. They just moved it, relocated it, buried it under paperwork and jurisdiction and good intentions that expired before the ink dried. So she was on the bike. And they were heading east on Route 7. And somewhere ahead of them, the Black Wolves convoy was riding toward Miller Road. And somewhere ahead of that, a gray sedan carrying Richard Talman was doing the same thing. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He couldn't answer it at speed. He let it ring. The grain elevator appeared first, a dark monolith against the charcoal sky, its metal sides sheeted with ice that caught the distant glow of a cell tower's red warning light. Then Miller Road, unmarked, unpaved, branching south off Route 7 into flatland darkness. He turned onto it and felt the tires lose traction on the frozen dirt. The rear end kicked sideways. He corrected. Mila's grip tightened. Half a mile down, he saw the lights, not headlights, parking lights. 23 motorcycles lined the shoulder of the road in a staggered row, engines off, riders standing beside them in the snow. Silent. Patient. The orange glow of cigarettes dotting the darkness like fireflies that had forgotten what season it was. He pulled up beside Cole's bike and killed the engine. The silence hit like a wall. After 20 minutes of wind and road noise and the Harley's exhaust hammering against his eardrums, the sudden quiet felt physical. A pressure change, like descending in an airplane. Cole was leaning against his bike with his arms crossed and his face unreadable. 2 other riders stood with him. Darian recognized them without needing introductions. Hatchet, real name Marcus Webb, the club's road captain, 6'4", rail-thin, a face like a closed fist and a voice that sounded like it had been dragged over gravel and left in the sun. And Briggs, the youngest patched member at 28, ex-Army medic, still carrying the quiet intensity of a man who had held soldiers together with gauze and willpower in places the news never mentioned. Cole looked at Mila as Darian lifted her off the bike, looked at the road behind them, looked at Darian. Talman's here. Where? Inside. Got here 6 minutes before we did. Lights are on. Front door's closed. Gray sedan's in the driveway. Darian set Mila down. She stood close to his leg, one hand gripping the hem of his vest. The snow was up to her ankles. She didn't seem to notice. Anyone else in there? Hard to tell. Curtains drawn on every window. We heard a door slam when we pulled up. That's it. Hatchet lit a fresh cigarette off the dying ember of the last one. The brief flare of the lighter illuminated deep creases around his mouth and a scar that ran from his left earlobe to his jawline. A souvenir from a bar fight in Reno that he never talked about and nobody asked about. We've been standing here 8 minutes, Hatchet said. That's 8 minutes of a man who locks children's doors knowing we're outside. 8 minutes of whatever's happening in there while we play citizen patrol. We talked about this, Cole said. You talked. I listened. Doesn't mean I agreed. Hatch, there are kids in that house, Cole, right now, behind locked doors. And we're standing in the snow having a meeting. The words hung in the frozen air. Nobody moved. Somewhere inside the house at the end of the road, a light in an upstairs window went off. Then came back on. Then went off again. The kind of pattern that could mean anything or nothing. A switch, a timer, a person moving between rooms, or a child trying to signal. Darian felt Mila's hand tighten on his vest. That's Lena's room, she whispered. Who's Lena? She's 9. She does that with the light when she's scared. On, off. She thinks someone will see. 23 men stood in the snow on Miller Road and watched a light blink in an upstairs window and felt the particular kind of rage that has no temperature, no sound, no outward expression, the kind that lives in the marrow and never fully leaves. Briggs stepped forward. The medic bag he always carried, olive drab, military surplus, the zipper held shut with a rubber band, hung from his shoulder. If those kids are injured, every minute matters. Hypothermia, dehydration, worse. I've seen what extended captivity does to children's bodies. Muscle atrophy, vitamin deficiency, pressure sores from being confined. I need to assess them. We go in that house uninvited, Cole said slowly. We're done. Everything we've built, every outreach program, every veteran ride, every relationship with local law enforcement we spent 20 years earning, gone. Breaking and entering, assault, kidnapping, if the courts see it that way. And Talman's the kind of man who has lawyers the way other people have credit cards. So we let him. I'm not letting him do anything. Cole's voice dropped to the register that every member of the Black Wolves recognized as the end of discussion. Not anger, authority. The voice of a man who had commanded platoons and buried friends and earned the right to be listened to, not because he demanded it, but because he had been right more often than anyone else in the room. I'm saying we do this smart. We don't give him 1 inch of legal ground to stand on. Smart takes time, Hatchet said. Kids don't have time. Hatch. My sister's kid was in foster care for 11 months before we got her out. 11 months. You know what 11 months looks like on a 6-year-old? I do. I've seen the scars, the real ones and the ones you can't see. So don't tell me about smart. The silence that followed was the kind that breaks things. Not loudly, quietly. The way ice fractures a pipe, slowly, inevitably, from the inside out. Darian spoke. Cole's right. Hatchet turned on him. You brought us out here, Voss. I know. You called us at 9:30 on a Wednesday night in a blizzard and said, get here, and we got here. Every one of us. And now you're telling me we stand in the cold and wait for a system that put this girl in that house in the first place? I'm telling you we do this so it sticks. We go in that house, Talman walks, his lawyers get the evidence thrown out. The kids end up back in the system, different house, same nightmare, and we're in county lockup where we can't help anyone. And if something happens to those kids while we're standing here being strategic? The question hit Darian in a place that didn't have armor. He looked down at Mila. She was staring at the blinking light in the upstairs window, her lips moving without sound, and he realized she was counting the blinks, counting them. Some kind of code, maybe, some language the children had invented in captivity because the adults in their world couldn't be trusted with words. Briggs, Darian said, call 911. Give them the address. Tell them there are minors in danger. Tell them you're a former combat medic on scene and you believe the children need immediate medical assessment. Don't mention the club. They'll ask who I am. Tell them the truth. A veteran who saw something wrong and reported it. Briggs pulled out his phone, walked 10 yards down the road for quiet. The blue glow of the screen lit his face in the darkness, and the wind carried fragments of his voice back in broken pieces. Children, locked doors, immediate danger. Cole leaned close to Darian, voice low, the kind of low that meant this wasn't for the others. This is personal for you. It wasn't a question. Don't. 6 years, Voss. You haven't taken on anything like this. You ride, you enforce, you do the job. You don't volunteer for missions that involve kids because you can't handle what it does to you, and everyone in this club knows it. I said don't. I'm your VP. I'm also the closest thing you have to a friend, which we both know isn't saying much. So I'm going to say this once. If you're doing this because of Emma, the name hit the air like a gunshot. Emma, his daughter's name. The name he hadn't spoken out loud in 4 years and hadn't allowed anyone else to speak in his presence since the night he put his fist through the clubhouse wall and broke 3 knuckles and stood there bleeding on the concrete floor and told Cole that if anyone said her name again, he would ride and never come back. Cole said it anyway. Then you need to tell me now. Because personal missions get people killed. I've seen it. You've seen it. Kandahar, Helmand. The Donovan situation in 19. Men who fight for reasons they can't control make choices they can't take back. Darian's jaw worked. A muscle in his cheek pulsed. His hands hung at his sides, fists half-formed, and the tendons in his forearms stood out like bridge cables beneath the tattoos. He looked at the house at the end of Miller Road with its drawn curtains and its blinking upstairs light and its blue door that was always locked, and he saw his daughter's face. Not Mila's face. Emma's. 3 years old. Blonde hair that smelled like strawberry shampoo. A laugh that sounded like someone dropping pennies into a glass jar. A car seat with a buckle that she couldn't undo by herself, which meant she was strapped in when the truck crossed the center line, which meant she couldn't move, couldn't run, couldn't do anything except sit there, and he closed his eyes. It's not about Emma. Voss, it's about the fact that there are kids behind that door and I'm standing here. Cole studied him for a long moment. The wind pushed snow between them. In the distance, a siren, faint, getting louder. Cops are coming, Cole said. Good. They're going to have questions. Let them. About the club. About why 23 bikers are parked on a residential road at 10 o'clock at night. We were riding. We stopped. We saw something. We called it in. That's thin. It's the truth. Part of it. The part that matters. Blue and red lights appeared on Route 7, distant and pulsing, throwing color against the snowfall. 2 units. Maybe 3. Darian watched them turn onto Miller Road and felt something shift in the ground beneath him. A tectonic adjustment. The moment when a situation passes from controllable to inevitable. The first cruiser stopped 50 yards from the motorcycles. Spotlight hit the line of bikes and riders. A voice on the PA system, distorted by wind and speaker static. Riders on the roadway, step away from the vehicles, hands visible. Cole straightened up. Here we go. 2 officers approached on foot. The first was young, late 20s, moving with the rigid posture of someone who graduated from the academy recently enough to still believe the manual. His hand rested on his holster, not drawing, ready. The second was older, heavy-set, unhurried, the walk of a man who had been on enough calls to know that urgency created more problems than it solved. The younger one stopped 10 feet from the group. Who's in charge here? Silence. 23 men standing in snow. Nobody answered because the Black Wolves didn't have a who's in charge for civilians. They had a president, Garrett Sull, who was currently 600 miles away at a veterans advocacy conference in Boise. They had a VP, Cole, who handled operations. And they had Darian, who handled problems. Cole stepped forward. My name is Cole Brecker. We made the 911 call. About a disturbance at... The younger officer checked his notes. 1847 Miller Road? About children in danger. Based on what? Based on the testimony of one of those children. Cole glanced toward Darian, toward Mila, barely visible behind Darian's leg, a small pink shape in the headlights. That girl escaped from the house earlier tonight. She approached one of our members at a diner on exit 14. She identified the homeowner as her foster guardian and stated that she and 4 other children are being held in locked rooms. The older officer moved forward. His nameplate read, Harkin. He looked at the line of motorcycles, looked at the patches, looked at Mila. That true, honey? Mila said nothing. Her face was pressed against the side of Darian's leg. She's scared, Darian said. I can see that. I'm asking her. She told me. She told everyone here. She'll tell you when she's ready. Officer Harkin's eyes narrowed. Not hostility, assessment. He was reading the situation the way a veteran reads a room. Who's armed, who's lying, who's the real danger, and who's performing. You affiliated with this club? I'm a member. Uh-huh. Huh. And you found this girl at a diner. She found me. And instead of calling the police, you called your club. I called both. You called your club first. The accusation sat in the air with the weight of truth, because it was the truth. And because the truth was the most dangerous thing in a situation where a motorcycle club was standing between law enforcement and a house full of children. Harkin looked at the house. The upstairs light had stopped blinking. Stay here, he said. All of you. Nobody moves toward that property. If I find out any of you have been on that porch tonight, I'll arrest every one of you and sort it out at the station. He walked toward his cruiser, radioed in. The younger officer stayed with the group, hand still on his holster, eyes moving between the riders with a nervousness that made Hatchet exhale cigarette smoke in his direction just to watch him flinch. Knock it off, Cole murmured. Kid's about to shoot his own foot. I said knock it off. 5 minutes, 10. Darian stood in the snow with Mila pressed against his leg and watched Officer Harkin walk up the driveway to the house on Miller Road, the blue door. He watched Harkin knock, watched the porch light come on, a warm yellow glow that made the house look inviting, normal, like any other house on any other street in any other town where nothing bad ever happened behind closed doors. The door opened. Richard Talman stood in the frame. Even from 50 yards, Darian could see the smile, the posture, the open hands, the performance of a man who had practiced this scene so many times, it was muscle memory. Talman spoke with Harkin for 2 minutes. 3. Then Harkin turned and walked back toward the cruisers. Alone. He approached the group with a face that had hardened into something professional and final. Mr. Talman is the children's licensed foster guardian through the county. He's got documentation for all 5 placements. He says the girl, he gestured toward Mila, has a history of running and fabricating stories. He says it's documented in her case file. He's lying, Darian said. He showed me the documentation. He locks them in at night. She told me. She's 7. She's telling the truth. And you know this because? Because I know what fear looks like. And that girl isn't fabricating anything. Harkin took a breath. Let it out slow. The steam curled between them. I don't have probable cause to enter that home. The documentation checks out. I've called family services for a welfare check, but that's going to be morning at the earliest. Budget cuts. 2 caseworkers for the entire county. Morning. Best I can do. There are 4 kids in that house right now. And their legal guardian is inside with them and the paperwork is clean. I hear you, I do, but I can't kick down a door based on the word of one child who the system has flagged as unreliable. The system, there it was. The word that contained everything, every failure, every rubber stamp, every overworked caseworker who meant well and didn't look hard enough and moved on to the next file because there were always more files than ours. The system had placed Mila in that house. The system had given Richard Talman 5 children. The system had documentation and case files and proper channels, and behind a blue door on Miller Road, 4 children sat in locked rooms and waited for the system to notice them. Darian felt something in his chest, not the hairline fracture from the diner, something larger, a structural failure, the feeling of load-bearing walls giving way inside a building that had been holding too much weight for too long. He looked down at Mila. She was staring up at him. She had heard everything. You said promise, she whispered. The words went through him like a blade through water, and every man standing on that frozen road heard them, and nobody moved. Nobody breathed, because the silence that followed was the kind that marks the exact moment when a man decides something that can't be undone. Darian looked at Cole. Cole's jaw was set. His eyes said, don't. His hands said, I'll follow you if you do. Darian looked at Hatchet. Hatchet dropped his cigarette in the snow and crushed it under his boot. Ready. Darian looked at the house on Miller Road, at the blue door, at the porch light glowing warm and false, at the upstairs window where a 9-year-old girl named Lena had been blinking a light on and off because she thought someone might see. Someone saw. He took a step forward. Sir, Officer Harkin's voice sharpened. I told you. I heard what you told me. If you go near that house, I will arrest you. Trespassing, interference with a custody arrangement, possibly assault if it goes sideways. Do you understand? I understand. He took another step. Voss. Cole's voice behind him, low, the last checkpoint. You go up that driveway, there's no coming back. Not for you, not for the club. Everything changes. Darian stopped. Not because of the warning, because Mila had let go of his vest. He turned. She was standing alone in the snow, arms at her sides, the pink jacket huge around her thin frame, and she was looking at him with an expression that no child should ever have to wear. Resignation. The quiet, exhausted acceptance of someone who has learned, through relentless experience, that adults make promises the way weather makes forecasts, with confidence and without accountability. She had let go because she expected him to stop. She had let go because every adult in her life had stopped. Darian Voss looked at that girl, and the last wall inside him, the one he'd built out of silence and miles and engine noise and the deliberate, methodical erasure of everything soft enough to wound, came down. He didn't go toward the house. He knelt in the snow in front of Mila, eye level, close enough that she could see the lines in his face and the gray in his stubble and the particular kind of damage that lives behind the eyes of men who have failed the people they loved most. I'm not stopping, he said. I'm changing the approach. You hear me? I'm not stopping. She searched his face the way she had searched it in the diner. Whatever algorithm of survival a 7-year-old runs to determine trustworthiness, some combination of voice, eyes, stillness, and the indefinable weight of intention, she ran it again. Okay, she said. He stood up, turned to Cole. Call Garrett. Wake him up. Tell him we need the attorney. The real one. Not the traffic ticket guy. The one who handled the Reno case. Cole pulled his phone. Briggs? You documented everything the girl told us? Briggs held up his phone. Recorded her statement at the diner. Audio. Time-stamped. Good. Hatchet. Take 4 guys and park across from the house. Rotating shifts. Nobody sleeps. Nobody moves. If anyone enters or exits, you document it. Plates, times, faces, everything. And if Talman tries to move the kids? Darian looked at Officer Harkin, who was standing by his cruiser with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who could see a situation developing beyond his control. Then Officer Harkin has probable cause. Harkin stared at him. The wind howled. The snow fell. The blue door at the end of Miller Road stayed closed. Don't make me regret not arresting you tonight, Harkin said. He got in his cruiser. The younger officer followed. The lights pulled away, red and blue fading into the storm, and then it was just the black wolves and the snow and the house and the silence. Cole closed his phone. Garrett's up. Attorney's name is Reeves. She's based in Denver. He says she'll drive up tonight if we need her. We need her. He also said, Cole paused, chose his next words with the precision of a man diffusing ordnance. He said to ask you if you're sure about all of this, because the club took a vote last year about involvement in custody cases after what happened in Pueblo, and the vote was unanimous. We don't intervene. We report. We refer. We step aside. I remember the vote. Then you know what you're doing right now goes against it. I know. And when Garrett asks me tomorrow whether I supported this or opposed it, what do I tell him? Darian looked at the house one more time, at the dark upstairs window where the light had stopped blinking, at the blue door, at the driveway where Richard Talman's sedan sat buried in fresh snowfall. Mila stood beside him, one hand wrapped around his index finger, and the weight of that grip, ounces, nothing, barely there, pulled harder than anything he had ever felt. Tell him I didn't give you a choice, Darian said. Tell him I went alone if you have to. But don't tell him we left. Cole Brecker looked at his sergeant-at-arms, at the girl holding his hand, at the 22 men standing in the snow behind them, waiting for a direction, any direction, because they had ridden into a blizzard on a Wednesday night for a phone call, and they were still here, and they were not leaving. Nobody's telling him we left, Cole said quietly, because we're not leaving. Hatchet was already moving. 4 riders peeled off with him, walking their bikes silently to positions across the road from the house, cutting engines, disappearing into the darkness like sentries taking posts along a perimeter that had no fence and no authority and no legal standing, only the collective decision of damaged men that tonight, on this road, in this snow, the door would not open without witnesses. Darian lifted Mila onto the back of his bike, wrapped his jacket around her over her own. She was shivering, and the shiver had nothing to do with cold. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere warm, somewhere safe. And then? And then we come back. He started the engine. The roar split the silence on Miller Road, and from inside the house, a curtain moved, just barely. 2nd floor. The room where Lena's light had been blinking. A small hand pressed against the glass. Then the curtain fell closed. And Darian Voss pulled onto Route 7 with a child on his back and the knowledge that Richard Talman was already 3 moves ahead. Because men like Talman were always 3 moves ahead. Because the system was built for men like Talman. Because documentation and licenses and charity galas and political handshakes were armor that no amount of leather and loyalty could pierce. But the Black Wolves were on Miller Road now. And they weren't leaving. And somewhere in Denver, an attorney named Reeves was putting on her coat. And somewhere in that house, behind the blue door, a 9-year-old girl had pressed her hand against a window because she saw the headlights through the snow and mistook them for rescue. She wasn't wrong. She was just early. Attorney Diana Reeves arrived at the Black Wolves clubhouse at 4:17 in the morning, driving a black Audi with Denver plates and the kind of quiet determination that came from 22 years of fighting cases nobody else would touch. She didn't knock. The door was open. Cole met her in the entryway, handed her a coffee, and led her to the back room where Darian sat at a scarred wooden table with Mila asleep on a couch behind him, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled like motor oil and old cigarettes. Reeves set a leather briefcase on the table, opened it, pulled out a legal pad already half covered in handwriting from the drive up. Tell me everything, she said. Start from the diner. Darian told her, flat, chronological, no editorializing, the way he used to give after-action reports in the military. Facts, sequence, outcome. Reeves listened without interrupting, her pen moving in sharp, precise strokes across the pad. And when he finished, she sat back and looked at him with the expression of someone who had just been handed a bomb and was deciding whether to defuse it or throw it. The Foster documentation is real? Harkin confirmed it. Then Talman is licensed through the county. That means a home study was completed. Background check, references, periodic reviews. The entire apparatus signed off on this man. The apparatus is wrong. The apparatus is the law. And right now the law says Richard Talman is the legal guardian of 5 children, one of whom is sitting in a motorcycle clubhouse at 4 a.m. with a man who has a felony assault conviction from 2016. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Darian didn't flinch. The felony was a fact of his life the way the scars on his hands were facts, earned, permanent, impossible to hide in any system that kept records. Bar fight, he said. A man was hitting his girlfriend in the parking lot of a roadhouse outside Pueblo. I intervened. You broke his jaw in 3 places. He was choking her. And the prosecutor saw an outlaw biker assaulting a civilian. You pled down from aggravated to simple. Did 18 months. I know my own history. So does every judge who's going to look at this case. Talman's attorney will put your record on a screen and ask the court why a convicted felon with ties to a motorcycle club had a 7-year-old girl on the back of his Harley at 10 o'clock at night in a snowstorm. And the court will listen, because courts speak in paper, and on paper, you're the danger. Darian said nothing. On the couch behind him, Mila stirred, pulled the blanket tighter, made a sound in her sleep that wasn't quite a word and wasn't quite a cry. Something between the two, the kind of sound that lives in the throats of children who dream about locked doors. Reeves looked at the sleeping girl. Something shifted behind her professional mask. A fracture in the composure, small and quickly sealed, but Darian saw it. He had spent his life reading the micro-expressions of people deciding whether to fight or walk away. I'm not walking away from this, he said, because he recognized the calculation happening behind her eyes. I didn't say you should. I said the system is built against you. There's a difference. She picked up her pen again. The audio recording. Briggs made it at the diner? Time-stamped. Mila's statement about other children. About locked doors. About Donna. All on record. That's something. Not enough for an emergency removal order, but enough to compel family services into an expedited review. I need to file a motion first thing. 6 hours from now, when the courthouse opens. She looked at her watch. I need the girl to give a formal statement to a child advocacy center. Not to you. Not to the police. To a trained forensic interviewer who can document her account in a way that holds up. She barely talks to me. She's not going to... She will. Because she already started. The hardest thing for a child in her situation is deciding to speak the first time. She did that in the diner. Everything after is momentum. And if we lose that momentum, if she goes silent, if she recants, if Talman's people get to her, we lose everything. The clubhouse was quiet except for the wind outside and the occasional creak of the building settling against the cold. 14 riders were still present, some sleeping in chairs, some standing by windows, some sitting in the garage bay with the overhead door cracked 6 inches for cigarette smoke. The smell of leather and exhaust and stale coffee and wet denim filled the building like a weather system that had moved indoors. Cole appeared in the doorway. His face told Darian something was wrong before his mouth did. Hatchet called. And? A van pulled up to the house 20 minutes ago. Commercial. No markings. 2 men went inside. They came out carrying boxes. Reeves stopped writing. Boxes? She repeated. Cardboard. Sealed. At least 6 that Hatchet counted. They loaded them into the van and drove west on Route 7. He's cleaning the house, Darian said. That's what Hatch thinks. Did he get plates? Partial. Snow was bad. He got photos from across the road, but the resolution... Send them to me, Reeves said. She was already pulling out her phone. Whatever you have. Photos, video, timestamps. If he's destroying evidence, that changes the calculus entirely. I can file for an emergency injunction to prevent removal of materials from the premises. By the time a judge signs that, I know. Her voice carried the particular frustration of someone who understood both the necessity and the inadequacy of legal process simultaneously. I know. Darian stood up. The chair scraped against the concrete floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot, where the bikes sat in rows under a half-inch of fresh snow. Dawn was still 2 hours away. The sky was the color of wet concrete, and the wind had shifted north, bringing a new front that smelled like iron and distance. "What's in the boxes?" he said. Not to Cole, not to Reeves, to the window, to the dark. Nobody answered. Mila said he locks the doors at night. She said there's a woman named Donna who watches the kids when he's gone. She said there are 4 others. What she didn't say, what she hasn't told us yet, is why. Why 5 children? Why locked doors? What happens inside that house that requires locked doors and a woman who pretends to be nice when visitors come? The room absorbed the words. Cole stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his jaw locked. Reeves sat at the table with her pen motionless above the pad. And on the couch, Mila slept with her fists curled beneath her chin, small and still and fragile in a way that made the air in the room feel heavy with the weight of everything nobody was saying. Darian's phone rang. Hatchet. Voice tight. Controlled in the way that men control their voices when control is the only alternative to violence. Voss, something else. Go. The van came back, same van, different direction. Pulled into the driveway, stayed 4 minutes, left again. This time one of the men went around to the back of the house. I couldn't see what he was doing from the road, but when he came back to the van, he was carrying something wrapped in a blanket, something small, moving. Darian's hand tightened around the phone until the plastic case creaked. A child. That's what I think. Hatch, tell me you followed the van. Sent 2 prospects on it. They're tracking east on Route 7, keeping distance. Van hasn't made them yet. Where's Talman? Gray sedan's still in the driveway. Lights on downstairs. He's inside. How many kids left in the house? No way to know. Curtains are drawn. No movement visible. Darian turned to Reeves. They're moving the children. The attorney was already on her phone, dialing with the precision of someone who had memorized the number she was calling. Judge Hathaway's clerk. Emergency line. She waited. 3 rings. 4. This is Diana Reeves, bar number 31742. I need an emergency hearing. Yes, tonight. I understand. Tell him it involves minor children in immediate danger of being relocated by their foster guardian to obstruct an investigation. I'll have the filing in his inbox within the hour. She hung up, looked at Darian. I can get a hearing by 8, maybe 7 if Hathaway's awake. But if Talman moves all the children before then, he won't. You can't guarantee that. Watch me. Darian. She used his first name for the first time, and the shift in register carried the weight of someone stepping outside her professional role into something more direct. If you or any member of your club physically prevents Richard Talman from leaving his property with those children, you are committing a crime. False imprisonment, potentially kidnapping, and everything, every piece of evidence, every testimony, every legal argument I build, collapses. He walks. The children disappear into whatever network he's connected to, and they never surface again. The word network landed in the room like a dropped blade. What do you mean, network? Cole asked. Reeves hesitated. It was the first time Darian had seen her hesitate, and it lasted only a moment, but in that moment her face showed something that looked less like legal calculation and more like dread. 5 foster children placed with 1 guardian, locked doors, a woman acting as a monitor, boxes being removed in the middle of the night, a child being transported at 4 in the morning. This isn't one man abusing foster children in isolation. This is infrastructure. The word hung in the clubhouse air, toxic and heavy, and every man who heard it felt it settle into the space between his ribs like something swallowed that couldn't be digested. Infrastructure. Darian thought about the boxes, about what could be inside sealed cardboard that needed to leave a house at 3 in the morning, documents, devices, recordings, the kind of material that men paid to access and paid more to destroy when the walls started closing in. He's not just keeping them, Darian said. The words came out flat, dead. The tone of a man who has arrived at a conclusion he cannot survive without acknowledging and cannot survive while carrying. He's selling access to them. Nobody spoke. The furnace in the corner kicked on with a thump and a wheeze, pushing warm air through ducts that rattled like bones in a tin can. Outside, a gust of wind hit the building hard enough to make the overhead garage door shudder. On the couch, Mila turned over in her sleep and whimpered. Cole walked to the far wall, put both hands flat against the cinder block, stood there breathing. Not a breakdown, not rage, something deeper and older, the full-body response of a combat veteran who has just had a new horror added to a catalog of horrors he thought was complete. "We need federal," Reeves said. "This is beyond local jurisdiction. If what you're describing is accurate, it's accurate. Then we're looking at potential trafficking charges, RICO, conspiracy. I have contacts at the Bureau's Denver field office, former colleague, but federal involvement changes the timeline. It could be days, weeks. Those kids don't have weeks." "I know." Darian's phone buzzed. Text from the prospect following the van. Van stopped. Industrial area. Grayson Business Park, Unit 12. Van inside. Door closed. He showed the screen to Cole. To Reeves. "Grayson Business Park," Cole said. "That's the storage complex off Highway 36. Light industrial. A lot of the units are empty since the economy turned." "Perfect place to stage things you don't want found," Darian said. Reeves shook her head. "Don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't. You go to that business park, you contaminate a federal crime scene before the Bureau even knows it exists. And if they're holding a child in there right now, then let the authorities told me to wait until morning. That was 4 hours ago. Since then, a van has been making trips between a house full of locked children and a storage unit in an industrial park. How many more trips do we wait for, counselor?" The question wasn't hostile, it was exhausted. The particular exhaustion of a man who has spent his entire adult life standing between vulnerable people and the machinery that processes them, and who has learned that the machinery runs on a clock that has nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with procedure. Reeves met his eyes. He saw the calculation happening again, the legal risks, the ethical obligations, the narrow channel between what was right and what was permissible, and he saw the moment when the calculation finished and the answer wasn't clean. "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear what I think I'm about to hear," she said. "And I'm going to be on the phone with the FBI field office while I'm pretending." She picked up her phone and walked out of the room. Cole turned from the wall. His face had settled into something hard and final, the expression Darian had seen only 3 times in 17 years of writing together. Once in Afghanistan, once during the Reno incident, and once at the funeral of a club member who had died from an overdose that everyone knew was intentional, but nobody called by its name. "How many do you need?" Cole asked. 4, plus Briggs. If there's a child in that unit, she needs a medic. "I'm coming." "Cole, I said I'm coming. Garrett can strip my patch later if he wants. Right now there might be a kid in a storage unit in the middle of winter, and I'm not standing in this clubhouse waiting for a phone call." Darian nodded. He walked to the couch and knelt beside Mila. She was awake. He didn't know when she'd woken up, but her eyes were open and she was looking at him with that ancient, unbearable clarity that children develop when they've been listening to adult conversations they were supposed to sleep through. "You heard," he said. She nodded. "How much?" "All of it." He let that sit. The instinct was to soften, to frame, to protect her from the weight of what she'd heard. But this girl had lived inside the reality that the adults in the room were just now discovering. She didn't need protection from information. She needed protection from the people the information was about. "The storage place," she said. "Is it where he keeps the computer room?" Darian's blood stopped. "The what?" "The computer room. He took me there once. A big room with computers and cameras and lights. He said it was for his business." Cole, halfway to the door, turned around. "Cameras?" Cole repeated. Mila pulled the blanket up to her chin. Her voice was steady in the way that a tightrope is steady, balanced, precarious, one tremor from falling. "He takes pictures and videos of the kids in the house and in the computer room. He has people who come and watch through the computers. He told us it was just for the business. He told us all families do it. The furnace thumped. The wind hit the building. The garage door shuddered. And inside the back room of the Black Wolves clubhouse, 5 men stood in absolute silence and felt the ground beneath their understanding of the world open into something bottomless. Not abuse, not neglect, not a single predator operating in isolation behind a blue door. A production operation. Cameras. Distribution. Clients. Cole sat down in the nearest chair. Not because he chose to, because his legs made the decision for him. He put his face in his hands and stayed there for 10 seconds, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet and his jaw was granite. "I'll kill him," he said. Not loudly, conversationally, the way a man states a fact about the weather. "I'll go back to that house and I will kill him." "No," Darian said. "Voss, well, no. He dies. The network survives. He's a node. Cut a node and the network routes around it. We need the network. We need the clients. We need every name, every file, every piece of data in that computer room, and we need it intact and untampered so that when Reeves hands it to the FBI, there is nowhere to hide. Not for Talman, not for anyone who watched, not for anyone who paid." Cole stared at him. The rage was still there, visible in the tendons of his neck, in the white-knuckle grip on the armrest, in the shallow breathing of a man holding himself together through force of will. But beneath the rage, training, discipline, the hard-won understanding that the mission was larger than the fury, and that fury without direction was just noise. "The computer room," Cole said. "How do we secure it without contaminating evidence?" "We don't go in. We go to the business park. We confirm the unit. We document what we see from outside, and we make sure nothing leaves that building until the FBI gets there." "And the kid Hatch saw them carrying?" Darian closed his eyes. "Opened them. That's the one thing we can't wait on." He pulled out his phone, called the prospect. "Where's the van?" "Still inside Unit 12, doors closed. No movement." "Can you see any other vehicles?" "Black SUV, parked around the back. Plates are... Hang on." Rustling, wind. "Colorado plates." "I got photos." "Lights? Sound? Anything from inside the unit?" "Nothing. Place is dead quiet." Dead quiet. A child carried from a house in a blanket at 4 in the morning to a dead quiet storage unit in an industrial park. Darian's mind ran scenarios the way it used to run them before combat patrols. Best case, worst case, most likely case, acceptable losses. Except there were no acceptable losses when the variable was a child. He looked at Mila. "The computer room. You said he took you there once. How long ago?" "Before the snow started. October, November. I don't know months very well." "Was it cold outside?" "A little." "October then. Were the other kids there?" "Just me and Lena." "What happened?" She pulled the blanket tighter. The steadiness in her voice trembled, and Darian saw the tightrope sway. Whatever was coming next was weight she had been carrying without anyone to hand it to. "He put us in a room with white walls and lights that were really bright, and he told us to stand there. And then he..." She stopped, looked at her hands, at the edges of the blanket, at the floor, at anything that wasn't Darian's face. "You don't have to," Darian said. "Not right now, not to me." He said nobody would believe us. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other, the dam breaking not from pressure, but from the sheer fatigue of holding. He said we were foster kids and nobody listens to foster kids because nobody wants us. He said the police work for him. He said the social workers work for him. He said everybody works for him, and if we talked, he would make us disappear and nobody would even look. Darian Voss had been shot at in 4 countries. He had held a dying friend in a ditch outside Kandahar while mortars fell close enough to feel the concussive waves in his teeth. He had identified his wife and daughter at a county morgue and driven home afterward and sat in the driveway for 7 hours without moving. None of it compared to sitting across from a 7-year-old girl who had been told that the world worked for her abuser. He didn't reach for her, didn't make promises, didn't offer comfort in any of the ways that adults offer comfort to children. No soft words, no reassurance, no "it's going to be okay" platitudes that dissolve on contact with reality. He just sat there, present, solid, A man made of scar tissue and engine grease and the particular brand of stubbornness that refuses to leave a room even when staying serves no tactical purpose. Because sometimes the act of staying is the purpose. He's wrong, Darian said. About all of it. The police don't work for him. I don't work for him. Those men out there don't work for him. And you're not going to disappear. Mila looked at the doorway where Cole had been standing. At the riders visible through the gap, leather-clad silhouettes against the fluorescent garage lights, some of them with heads bowed and fists clenched, because the walls in this building were thin and they had heard everything. Voss, Cole's voice from the garage. Changed, something Darian hadn't heard before. Not anger, not grief, fear. He walked to the doorway. Cole held his phone screen toward him, a text from Hatchet. 2 words and a photo. Cops back. The photo showed 3 police cruisers and an unmarked sedan parked in front of the house on Miller Road. Not responding to a call. Staged. Organized. The kind of police presence that arrives with purpose, not urgency. That's not a welfare check, Darian said. No. Who sent them? Hatch says one of the uniforms told him the county DA ordered an emergency custody enforcement. They're there to return the girl. Return her to Talman. That's what Hatch understood. The DA. Yeah. At 5 in the morning. Yeah. Darian felt it then. The architecture of power revealing itself. The structural beams and load-bearing walls of a system that didn't just fail children, but was engineered to process them. A county DA who authorized a custody enforcement at 5 in the morning on a case that had been reported 4 hours ago for a foster guardian whose documentation happened to be ready in his car, whose boxes were being moved in the dark, whose van had traveled to a storage unit containing cameras and computers and a child wrapped in a blanket. Not incompetence. Complicity. How far up does this go? Cole asked. Not really asking Darian, asking the air. Asking the same empty space that every soldier asks when the mission changes shape and the enemy turns out to be wearing a different uniform than expected. Darian looked at the sleeping girl on the couch who wasn't sleeping anymore, who was sitting up with the blanket around her shoulders and her eyes wide and her face carrying the expression of a child who has heard the word cops and knows, with the certainty of experience, that cops do not always mean rescue. Far enough that a DA makes phone calls at 5 in the morning, Darian said. Far enough that Talman wasn't scared of us. He was scared we'd slow him down long enough for someone to look. His phone rang. Reeves. I just got off with the FBI field office. They're interested, but interested isn't action. They need 48 hours minimum to open a case, assign agents, coordinate with... We don't have 48 hours. The county DA just sent police to the house to return Mila to Talman. Silence on the line. Then Reeves's voice, stripped of its professional veneer, carrying raw disbelief. The county DA, Lawrence Vick. You know him? I know of him. He chaired the Foster Care Reform Committee 2 years ago. He's the reason the county expanded its foster placement program. He personally championed the initiative that... She stopped. The silence that followed was the sound of a lawyer arriving at a conclusion that her profession had trained her to approach with evidence and caution, but that her instincts had reached in a single, sickening leap. The placement program, Darian said, the one that put 5 children in Talman's house. Vic designed it, streamlined the vetting process, reduced oversight requirements to increase placement speed. He called it compassionate efficiency. How many children went through that program? Another silence, longer. Hundreds, Reeves said. Over 2 years. Hundreds. The word filled the clubhouse the way smoke fills a closed room, slowly, invisibly, until suddenly you can't breathe and can't see, and the exits are behind you. Darian gripped the phone. His knuckles were white. The tattoo across his fingers. Hold fast, a sailor's charm he'd gotten at 19 in a Norfolk parlor because a girl he'd loved for 3 weeks told him it suited him, stretched over bone and tendon. Reeves, can you get a federal judge to issue an emergency protective order tonight? Not local, federal. On what grounds? Corruption of local authority. Conflict of interest in the DA's office. Immediate danger to a minor witness. Whatever grounds keep Mila out of Talman's custody for the next 24 hours. I can try. I need everything you have. Audio, photos, the business park address, the van plates, everything. You'll have it in 10 minutes. He hung up, looked at Cole, looked at the men in the garage, looked at Mila, who was standing now, the blanket pooled around her feet, small and upright and trembling. "They're coming for me," she said. Not a question. "Not tonight. You can't stop them. He knows everybody. He told us. He knows the judge and the police and the—" "Mila." He knelt in front of her, eye level. The same position he'd taken in the snow on Miller Road when she'd let go of his vest because she expected him to stop. "Look at me." She looked. "He told you nobody would believe you. He told you the world works for him. He told you you'd disappear. And right now, at 5 in the morning, there are cops outside that house trying to bring you back because someone powerful made a phone call. So parts of what he told you are true. Some of those people do work for him. Some of them won't believe you." Her lip trembled. "But not all of them. Not the attorney who drove here from Denver at midnight. Not the FBI agents who are opening a file right now. Not the 23 men who rode through a blizzard because I asked them to. And not me." He stood up. "Cole, how long until those cruisers figure out she's not at the diner? Cheryl won't talk. How long until they come here? They know about the clubhouse. Everyone does. An hour, maybe less. Then we have an hour." Darian picked up Mila. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder, and he carried her through the garage where 14 men stood in leather and shents and watched them pass with the collective expression of soldiers who have just learned that the war is larger than anyone briefed them on, and that the enemy wears suits and carries badges and designed the very system that was supposed to protect the people it consumes. He put her on his bike, wrapped the blanket around her, started the engine. "Where?" Cole asked, already mounting his own Harley. Darian looked east, where dawn was breaking through the storm in thin lines of gray and orange, painting the snow with the first light of a day that would either end this or end them. "Somewhere they can't reach," he said. "And then we burn it all down, every file, every name, every connection. We hand it to the FBI, and we let the fire do what fire does." Cole kicked his engine alive. 2 riders followed, then 3 more. Then the rest, one by one, until the parking lot roared with the collective thunder of men who had crossed a line they couldn't see from the other side, and who understood in the marrow of their bones that the road they were on now had no U-turns, no exits, and no destination except the truth. And somewhere in a house on Miller Road, behind a blue door that was always locked, Richard Talmon stood in his kitchen and made a phone call of his own. "We have a problem," he said. "The girl talked, and she's with the bikers." The voice on the other end was calm, measured, the voice of someone accustomed to problems and equally accustomed to making them disappear. "How much does she know? Enough? And the storage unit?" Being cleared. "Not fast enough. I'll send a team. And Richard?" "Yes? The girl needs to stop talking. Tonight. Whatever it takes." The line went dead. Richard Talmon set his phone on the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the empty road where 23 motorcycles had stood in the snow 3 hours ago. They were gone now, but they were coming back. And this time, he wouldn't be waiting alone. They ran east through the last hour of darkness on roads that hadn't been plowed, and wouldn't be plowed until county trucks started their routes at 6. Darian rode point with Mila pressed against his back, her arms locked around his ribs, her face buried in leather that smelled like road salt and cold sweat. Cole rode left flank. Briggs rode right. Behind them, 4 more bikes in staggered formation, headlights cutting tunnels through the snowfall that closed behind them like curtains drawn across a stage. Darian's destination was a place he hadn't visited in 3 years. A cabin on the western slope of Harker's Ridge, 40 minutes from the clubhouse, 20 minutes from the nearest paved road, accessible only by a fire trail that the Forest Service maintained once a year and forgot about the other 11 months. The cabin belonged to a man named Tom Oren, a retired Black Wolves member, Vietnam veteran, 71 years old, living alone with 2 dogs and a wood stove, and the kind of deliberate isolation that comes from deciding the world has taken enough from you and you'd rather not give it the chance to take more. Tom didn't have a phone, didn't want one. The only way to reach him was to ride up the ridge and knock on his door, which is what Darian did at 5:52 in the morning while snow accumulated on his shoulders, and Mila stood behind him wrapped in a blanket that was more ice than fabric. The door opened. Tom Oren stood in the frame in a flannel shirt and wool pants, a lever-action rifle held loosely at his side. Two German shepherds pressing past his legs to investigate the visitors. He looked at Darian, looked at the girl, looked at the bikes idling in his yard. "No," he said. "Tom, whatever this is, no." "There's a kid." Tom looked at Mila again. The dogs had reached her. One sniffed her hand. The other sat at her feet and leaned against her leg. And Mila, who had barely spoken in an hour, who had shivered through 40 minutes of frozen highway without complaint, put her hand on the dog's head and let out a breath that sounded like something unlocking. Tom's jaw worked. He stepped aside. "Stove's hot. Coffee's on. Don't track snow past the mat." Darian carried Mila inside. The cabin was small. One room downstairs, a loft above, a kitchen barely wide enough for two people to stand in without touching elbows. But it was warm. The wood stove in the corner radiated heat that hit like a wall after the cold outside, and the smell of burning pine and strong coffee and old dog filled the space with something that approximated safety in a way that the clubhouse, for all its numbers, couldn't match. He set Mila on the couch. She was shaking. Briggs was beside her in seconds, medic bag open, pen light out, checking her pupils, her pulse, her fingertips for frostbite. She let him work without resisting, the passive cooperation of a child accustomed to being examined by adults she didn't choose. "She's hypothermic," Briggs said. "Mild. Core temp's probably 95, 96. She needs warmth, fluids, calories, and she needs to sleep somewhere that isn't the back of a motorcycle." Tom brought a quilt from the loft. Heavy, handmade, faded in patterns that suggested someone had sewn it decades ago with more love than skill. He draped it over Mila without ceremony or sentiment, the economical gestures of a man who had kept other people alive before and didn't need to make a performance of it. "How long?" Tom asked, directing the question at Darian. "I don't know, hours. Maybe a day." "What's after that?" "Either the FBI moves or we do." Tom looked at the girl on his couch, at the dogs settling on either side of her like sentries, at the coffee pot on the stove. "Cream's in the box outside, frozen solid, but it'll thaw." He walked to the window, leaned the rifle against the frame, and stood watch the way he'd stood watch in jungles 50 years ago, silent, alert, expecting nothing good but ready for whatever came. Cole pulled Darian outside. The cold hit them both like a slap. Dawn was a gray smear along the eastern ridge, the kind of winter sunrise that didn't so much arrive as reluctantly admit its existence. "Reeves called while we were riding," Cole said. His breath plumed in the frozen air. Federal judge denied the emergency protective order. On what grounds? Insufficient evidence of immediate danger. The judge said Mila's statements are uncorroborated and the audio recording was made without parental or guardian consent, which makes it inadmissible in his jurisdiction. Darian leaned against the porch railing. The wood was slick with ice. He gripped it until his knuckles ached. The system is closing ranks. Reeves doesn't think the judge is compromised. She thinks he's cautious. There's a difference, but right now the result is the same. What about the FBI? Still interested, still processing. They assigned a case agent, woman named Vasquez. She's reviewing what Reeves sent over, but she told Reeves explicitly, no action without a formal evidence package, and that takes time. Time we don't have. I know. Talman is moving children right now, clearing evidence right now, and somewhere in that storage unit there's a kid wrapped in a blanket, and we're standing on a porch drinking coffee. Voss, Cole's voice dropped, not to the command register, lower, the voice he used in private, which Darian had heard maybe 5 times in 17 years. I know where you're at. I see it. Every man here sees it, and I need you to hold, not for the system, not because I think patience is going to save those kids, because if you break right now, Mila loses the one person she trusted enough to talk to, and everything she told us dies with your credibility. Darian stared at the snow, at the tire tracks from their bikes, already filling in, disappearing, at the gray sky that offered nothing. His phone buzzed. Hatchet. Talk to me. The cops left the house 30 minutes ago, but Talman didn't go back inside. He got in the sedan and drove west. I'm following at distance. West toward what? Toward you. Toward the ridge. He turned off Route 7 onto County Road 14. Darian's spine straightened. County Road 14 ran along the base of Harker's Ridge. It was the only access road to the fire trail that led to Tom's cabin. He knows where we are. How? Cole said, overhearing. The DA, the cops. They know about the club. They know about the cabin. Tom's address is in the county records. If Talman has access to law enforcement databases, he has access to everything, Cole said. That's the whole point. That's what we've been saying for 6 hours. Darian turned to the door. Briggs, get Mila ready to move. Briggs appeared in the doorway. She just stopped shaking. If I put her back on a bike, if Talman reaches this cabin, he's not coming alone, and whatever he brings with him won't be a custody dispute. Briggs disappeared inside. Darian heard him talking to Mila in the low, steady voice he used with casualties in the field, calm without condescension, urgent without panic. Hatch, how far? He's on County 14 now, 15 minutes from the fire trail, maybe 20 in this snow. Is he alone? Negative. The black SUV from the business park is behind him, 2 vehicles. The SUV? Same one, Colorado plates. I sent the photos to Reeves an hour ago. 2 vehicles. Talman and whoever owned the black SUV, whoever had told him on the phone that the girl needs to stop talking tonight, whatever it takes. Darian looked at Cole. Cole looked at the 4 riders standing in the yard beside their bikes, snow on their shoulders, exhaust curling from idling engines. We can't outrun them with Mila on a bike, Darian said. Not on the fire trail, too narrow, too icy. Then we don't run. Cole, 17 years, Voss. You and me, Fallujah, Helmand, Reno, the Donovan thing. When have we ever run? This isn't Fallujah. No, it's worse. Because in Fallujah, the enemy wore uniforms and the rules were clear, and the people we were protecting were behind walls. Here the enemy wears a suit, and the walls are made of paperwork, and the person we're protecting is 7 years old and scared and sitting on a couch in a cabin on a mountain. And if we run, she learns the same lesson she's learned her entire life. That the people who say they'll protect her leave when it gets hard. The words hung in the dawn light. Darian looked at the cabin, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the window where Tom Oren stood with his rifle and his dogs, and his 60 years of not looking away from things that needed to be faced. We hold the trail, Darian said. We hold the trail. Nobody gets up this ridge. Nobody gets up this ridge. They moved fast. The fire trail was a single-lane dirt path that climbed the western slope of Harker's Ridge in a series of switchbacks, hemmed by dense pine on both sides. At the base, where it met County Road 14, the trail narrowed to barely 10 feet, wide enough for 1 vehicle or 2 motorcycles side by side. It was a bottleneck, a choke point, the kind of terrain that evened odds regardless of numbers. Darian positioned 3 bikes across the trailhead, engines off, blocking the entrance. He and Cole stood in front of them. Hatchett parked 50 yards up the trail, high ground, where he could see the road below and the ridge above. Briggs stayed at the cabin with Mila and Tom. The wait was 11 minutes. The gray sedan appeared first, moving slowly on the icy road, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn murk. Behind it, the black SUV, riding close, the aggressive spacing of a vehicle that wasn't following but escorting. They approached the trailhead and stopped, engines idling, exhaust mixing with the snowfall in clouds of white vapor. The sedan's door opened. Richard Talman stepped out, different from the diner. The charcoal overcoat was gone. He wore a black jacket, practical, the kind designed for function rather than impression. His face had lost the practiced warmth, the fundraiser smile, the performance of benevolence. What remained was the substrate, cold, calculating, the face of a man who had been operating behind a mask for so long that removing it required effort he no longer felt compelled to make. He walked to the trailhead, stopped 10 feet from the line of motorcycles, looked at Darian, looked at Cole. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Wouldn't be the first one," Darian said. "I have a court order for the return of my foster daughter, signed by Judge Hadley of the County Family Court. If you obstruct, show me." Talman reached into his jacket, produced a folded document, held it up. Signed an hour ago. By a judge at 5 in the morning. Family court has emergency provisions. You'd know that if you'd consulted an attorney. I did. She's on the phone with the FBI right now. The mention of the FBI changed something. Not in Talman's face, that remained controlled, disciplined, the product of years spent managing appearances under pressure. But in his body. A shift in weight from his left foot to his right. A micro-adjustment. The kind of involuntary repositioning that happens when the ground beneath a man's strategy becomes uncertain. The FBI has no jurisdiction here. They do if there's a federal crime. There is no federal crime. There's a troubled foster child who ran away from home and was picked up by a motorcycle gang, club, who transported her across county lines without authorization, exposed her to dangerous conditions, and are now refusing to comply with a valid court order. I'm the victim here, legally, publicly, and in every way that matters. Cole took one step forward. Just one. The kind of step that closes a distance without crossing a line. You lock children's doors at night. That's a therapeutic recommendation for their safety. You have cameras in a storage unit. The pause lasted a fraction of a second. A civilian wouldn't have noticed. Darian noticed. Cole noticed. Hatchet, watching from 50 yards up the trail, noticed. I don't know what you're talking about. Unit 12. Grayson Business Park. We have photos of your van entering and exiting at 3 and 4 in the morning. We have your plates. We have the SUV's plates. Darian nodded toward the black vehicle idling behind Talman's sedan. And we have a witness who describes a room with computers, cameras, and lights where children were taken and photographed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing on the mountain. Pine trees creaked under their burden of snow. The wind pushed through the valley below with a low moan that sounded like the earth exhaling. The SUV's engine idled in a steady mechanical heartbeat. Talman's composure held, but his eyes changed. The calculation behind them shifted from confident to cornered, and cornered men are the most dangerous animals in any ecosystem because they no longer weigh consequences. They weigh survival. Who's in the SUV? Darian asked. My attorney. Your attorney drives a black SUV with tinted windows and follows you up a mountain road at dawn. I felt unsafe given the situation. Open the window. Excuse me? Have your attorney roll down the window. If it's a lawyer, I'd like to see a lawyer. Talman didn't move. The SUV didn't move. The tinted windows stayed black and reflective, showing nothing but the snow and the pine trees and the distorted shapes of two men standing in front of 3 motorcycles at the base of a fire trail. We're done talking, Talman said. He reached for his phone. I'm calling the sheriff. Call whoever you want. Nobody goes up this trail. You're obstructing a court order. I'm standing on a public road next to my motorcycle. If that's obstruction, arrest me. Talman's jaw tightened. He looked at the trailhead, at the bikes blocking it, at the dense pine on both sides that made going around impossible without a chainsaw and an hour of work, at Cole, who stood with his arms crossed and his weight settled and his face communicating nothing except the absolute immovable certainty of a man who had chosen his position and would not be moved from it by documents or threats or anything short of physical force. Last chance, Talman said. Move the bikes. Let me collect my foster daughter. This ends peacefully. None of this has been peaceful, Darian said. Not for Mila, not for Lena, not for the other 3 kids you locked behind doors every night. You just kept it quiet. Something cracked behind Talman's facade. Not the composure, the patience, the willingness to perform. He turned and walked back to the SUV, knocked on the rear window. The window lowered 2 inches. A voice from inside, male, low. The kind of voice that occupied conference rooms and gave instructions without raising its volume, because volume implies effort, and effort implies equality with the person being addressed. Darian couldn't hear the words. He could see Talman listening, nodding, the posture of a subordinate receiving orders from someone who held the weight in their arrangement. Talman walked back. His face had changed. The calculation was gone. What remained was decision, clean, final, stripped of pretense. My associate would like to speak with you. Your associate can come out here. He prefers the vehicle. I prefer the open air. You're not in a position to prefer anything. The SUV's rear door opened. A man stepped out, mid-60s, silver hair cut short, a face that belonged on a campaign poster or a corporate annual report, square, tanned, authoritative. He wore a navy overcoat over a suit and tie, and his shoes were polished to a mirror finish that collected snow the moment he set foot on the ground, which he looked down at with the mild displeasure of someone unaccustomed to surfaces that hadn't been prepared for his arrival. He approached the trailhead with the measured stride of a man who had never been physically threatened and didn't believe he ever would be, because the world he inhabited resolved its conflicts through channels that rendered physical confrontation obsolete. Attorneys, injunctions, phone calls to people who answered on the first ring. He stopped 5 feet from Darian, looked at him the way a building inspector looks at a condemned structure, acknowledging its existence while planning its removal. "I'm Warren Cross," he said. "I'm an attorney and investor. Richard is my client and associate. I'm here to resolve this situation before it becomes more complicated than it needs to be." "It's already complicated." "It doesn't have to be. The girl returns to her guardian's custody. You and your men ride home. No charges are filed. No one gets hurt. This conversation never happened." "And the other children?" "What other children?" "The 4 in the house. The one your people carried out in a blanket at 4 in the morning." Cross's expression didn't change. It remained fixed in that particular mask of professional neutrality that certain men wear so habitually it becomes indistinguishable from their actual face. But his hands, clasped in front of him, shifted. The left thumb pressed into the right palm. Pressure, control. "I don't know what you think you've seen," Cross said, "but I assure you, I don't need your assurance. I need you to get off this road. This road is public property." "So am I." Cross studied him. The way Talman had studied him at the diner, reading, calculating, assessing threat levels and response options. But where Talman's calculation had been tactical, Cross's was architectural. He wasn't thinking about this moment. He was thinking about the structure that protected it, the layers of legal and political insulation that separated him from consequence. "You have a felony record," Cross said. "Assault. You served 18 months in state custody. You're a member of an organization that the ATF has investigated twice in the last decade. Your credit score is 412. You own nothing of value except a motorcycle and a prepaid phone. You have no family, no assets, no institutional support, and no standing in any court in this state." He recited these facts the way a doctor reads test results, clinically, without malice, as though the information itself was sufficient to establish the diagnosis. "On the other hand," Cross continued, "I represent interests that employ 3,700 people in this state, contribute to 14 charitable foundations, and have relationships with every level of government from municipal to federal. The question you should be asking yourself is not whether you can stop us. It's whether anyone will notice when we stop you." The wind howled through the valley. Snow swept across the road in horizontal sheets. The pine trees bent and straightened and bent again. And somewhere up the ridge, in a cabin with a wood stove and 2 dogs, a 7-year-old girl sat wrapped in a quilt, wondering if the men who promised to protect her were still standing. Darian didn't answer Cross. He didn't need to. Because while Cross was delivering his inventory of power and immunity, something was happening behind him that he hadn't accounted for. Engines. Not from the trailhead, from the road below, from Route 7, from every direction that sound could travel in a mountain valley where acoustics carried for miles, and the air was cold enough to sharpen every frequency. The rumble built the way it had built outside Kessler's diner 12 hours ago. First a tremor in the ground, then a vibration in the chest, then a full-body concussion of noise that made the snow tremble on the branches and the windows of the SUV buzz in their frames. Headlights appeared on County Road 14. Not 3, not 5. A procession. Bikes emerging from the snowfall in single file, then pairs, then clusters, filling the road from shoulder to shoulder, their exhaust rising in a column that merged with the storm clouds overhead. They came from the east. They came from the south. They came from the direction of towns Darian hadn't called and chapters he hadn't contacted because Cole had called them, and Hatchet had called them. And the network of broken, scarred, leather-wrapped men who made up the Black Wolves MC didn't need detailed briefings or strategic justifications. They needed 3 words: kid in trouble. They parked behind the gray sedan and the black SUV, surrounding both vehicles in a semicircle of chrome and steel and idling engines. Darian counted. Stopped at 40. More were still coming, headlights visible on the road below, a river of light flowing uphill through the darkness. Garrett Sull was among them. The president of the Black Wolves, who had been in Boise 14 hours ago and had apparently ridden through the night across 400 miles of frozen highway to be here at dawn on a mountain road where his club was breaking every rule he'd ever set. He dismounted a black road glide that was caked in road salt and ice, his face raw from the wind, his beard frosted white, and he walked past 50 men without stopping until he stood beside Darian at the trailhead and looked at Warren Cross with the quiet, undramatic fury of a man who had commanded armies and buried brothers and never once confused power with authority. "Garrett Sull," he said, "President, Black Wolves MC." Cross looked at the wall of motorcycles behind him, at the riders, at the faces, hard, weathered, scarred, tattooed, exhausted, and absolutely, immovably present. "This changes nothing," Cross said, but his voice had thinned. The architectural confidence was intact, but the foundation had shifted and he could feel it, the way you feel a building settle before you hear the crack. "It changes one thing," Garrett said. "You came here thinking nobody was watching. Now everybody's watching." He pulled out a phone, not the club's burner, his personal phone. He turned the screen toward Cross. A video was playing, shaky, shot from a distance, but clear enough. The van at Grayson Business Park. The men carrying boxes. The blanket-wrapped shape being loaded in the dark. "This went to the FBI field office in Denver 20 minutes ago," Garrett said, along with license plates, timestamps, and a 7-year-old's recorded testimony. But that's not the interesting part. He swiped to a second video. Different angle. Higher quality. The video showed the interior of a room, white walls, bright lights, cameras on tripods, a desk with multiple monitors. Someone had been inside Unit 12. Someone had recorded what was there. Cross's face changed. The mask held, but the eyes behind it went flat. Dead. The eyes of a man watching his architecture collapse from the inside. "How did you left a prospect outside the business park for 6 hours. Young man, 22, former Marine, quiet, patient, good with a phone camera. When your people cleared out at 4:30, they didn't check if the rear access door latched behind them." The silence that followed was absolute, not the silence of pause or consideration. The silence of checkmate. The silence that exists in the space between the moment a man realizes he is finished and the moment his body accepts what his mind already knows. Warren Cross looked at Darian Voss. At Garrett Sull, at Cole Brecker and Hatchet and the 60-plus riders standing in the snow behind a wall of motorcycles that stretched across the road like a barricade built not from strategy, but from the collective refusal of damaged men to let one more child disappear into the machinery of exploitation. "You have no idea what you've started," Cross said. "Yeah, we do," Darian said. "That's the point." Cross turned and walked back to the SUV. His stride was different now, shorter, faster. The walk of a man moving toward a phone, toward attorneys, toward the apparatus of damage control that men like him maintained the way other people maintained insurance policies. He reached the SUV, opened the door, and stopped, because from the road below, from Route 7, from the direction of town, a different sound was rising through the valley. Not engines, sirens, multiple, growing louder. The particular cadence of federal vehicles running heavy and fast, the kind of sirens that local jurisdictions moved aside for because the authority behind them came from a place that county DAs and family court judges couldn't reach. 3 black Suburbans appeared on County Road 14, blue and red lights flashing behind their grills. They moved through the line of motorcycles with deliberate speed, riders parting to let them through, and stopped in a row behind the SUV and the sedan, blocking any retreat down the mountain. Doors opened. Men and women in dark jackets with 3 yellow letters across the back stepped onto the snow-covered road. Agent Vasquez was in the lead. Short, compact, dark hair pulled back, a face that communicated exactly one thing: I have jurisdiction, and I'm using it. She walked past the motorcycles, past the riders, past 60 men standing in the freezing dawn, and stopped in front of Warren Cross with a document in her hand. Warren Cross? He straightened. The mask attempted to reassemble. I'd like to speak with my attorney. You'll have that opportunity. Federal warrant, Grayson Business Park, Unit 12. Residence at 1847 Miller Road. Your personal residence in Denver, your vehicle. Mr. Talman's vehicle and residence. We're seizing all electronic devices, storage media, and documentation. She turned to Talman, who was standing beside his sedan with the expression of a man watching a building fall in slow motion and realizing he's still inside. Richard Talman, you're under arrest on federal charges of conspiracy to exploit minors. Additional charges pending. You have the right to remain silent. Talman said nothing. An agent approached him with handcuffs. The metal clicked in the cold air, a small sound, precise, final. The sound of a mechanism engaging, the sound of a door locking from the right side for the first time. Darian watched them put Talman in the back of a Suburban, watched a second team approach Cross, watched the warrants being served, the badges being shown, the machine of federal law enforcement engaging with the cold, impersonal efficiency of a system that, when it worked, when the right hands pushed the right levers, when evidence arrived intact and witnesses refused to disappear, could reach into places that local corruption had sealed shut and tear them open. He turned away, walked past the bikes, past the riders, up the fire trail toward the cabin, leaving footprints in the snow that filled behind him as though the mountain was erasing his path. Cole followed. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were boots on frozen ground, wind through pine, and the distant rumble of a helicopter appearing over the eastern ridge. Federal air support, arriving to coordinate the simultaneous raids that were now unfolding at Miller Road, at Grayson Business Park, and at locations across the state that Agent Vasquez's team had identified from the evidence the Black Wolves prospect had recorded through an unlatched door. Darian reached the cabin, pushed through the front door. Heat and wood smoke and the smell of coffee hit him, and he stood in the entryway with snow melting off his boots and his hands shaking, not from the cold, not from adrenaline, but from the specific tremor that comes when the body finally processes what the mind has been holding at arm's length for hours. Mila was on the couch. The dogs were beside her. Tom Oren stood at his window with his rifle, where he had stood all night, keeping watch over a child he'd never met because a man he'd ridden with decades ago had brought her to his door, and that was enough. She looked up when Darian entered. Her eyes searched his face the way they always searched his face, for the answer to the only question that mattered to a 7-year-old who had been hunted and locked and told that the world worked for her abuser. "Is it over?" she asked. Darian looked at her, at the quilt around her shoulders, at the dogs leaning against her, at the crayon she was holding. Tom must have found it somewhere, an old crayon, red, worn down to a stub, and the piece of paper on the couch beside her where she had been drawing something while the mountain shook with engines and sirens. He looked at the drawing, a motorcycle, a tall figure in a leather vest, a small figure holding the tall figure's hand, and above them, drawn in the shaky, imprecise lines of a child's hand, a single word: safe. Darian's throat closed. He sat down on the edge of the couch, put his elbows on his knees, put his face in his hands, and for the first time since a Navy corpsman pulled shrapnel from his thigh in a desert operating room, for the first time since a county coroner asked him to confirm the identity of his wife and daughter, for the first time in 17 years of riding and fighting and silencing every frequency of his emotional spectrum until he was nothing but engine noise and forward motion, Darian Voss broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, a single breath that shuddered on the way in and fractured on the way out, and then another, and then his shoulders moved in a rhythm that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with the weight that a human body can carry only so long before the bones remember that they're not made of steel. Mila set down the crayon. She scooted across the couch until she was beside him. She didn't speak. She didn't hug him. She put her small hand on his forearm and left it there, and the warmth of it, impossible, inexplicable, the warmth of a child's hand on the arm of a man who had forgotten what warmth felt like, passed through his skin and into the fracture line that had been widening since a diner on exit 14, and it didn't heal it. Nothing heals a fracture like that, but it held it, braced it, kept it from spreading into collapse. Cole stood in the doorway. Tom stood at the window. The dogs lay still, the stove crackled, and outside, on the mountain road below, 63 motorcycles sat in the snow, while federal agents dismantled the architecture of a network that had consumed children for years because the men who built it believed that money and power and documentation could make innocence invisible. They were wrong. Because a 7-year-old girl had grabbed the back of a leather vest in a roadside diner and whispered 3 words to a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to protect except the promise he'd made to a ghost. And he kept it. The federal raids took 11 hours. Darian didn't leave the cabin during any of them. He sat on the floor beside the couch where Mila slept, his back against the wooden frame, his legs stretched across the old rug that smelled like dog hair and pine resin. Tom kept the wood stove fed. Cole stood on the porch fielding calls. Briggs checked Mila's temperature every hour, marking it on the back of a receipt with a pencil stub he'd found in the medic bag. By noon, her core temp was back to normal. By 2 o'clock, she was eating canned soup that Tom heated on the stove in a dented pot, blowing on each spoonful the way she'd blown on the hot chocolate at Kessler's Diner a lifetime ago. Darian watched her eat and felt the peculiar exhaustion that follows sustained crisis. Not sleepiness, but emptiness. The sensation of a machine that has been running at redline for too long and can no longer tell the difference between idle and stall. His phone rang 6 times between noon and dusk. 3 calls from Reeves with legal updates delivered in the clipped, efficient shorthand of a woman managing multiple crises across multiple jurisdictions. 2 calls from Hatchett at the house on Miller Road. 1 from a number he didn't recognize, which turned out to be Agent Vasquez. He took that call on the porch. The snow had stopped. The sky was white and flat and featureless, the color of an unwritten page. Mr. Voss. Agent. We've executed warrants at 4 locations: Miller Road, Grayson Business Park, Tallman's secondary residence in Thornton, and a property in Denver registered to a shell company traced back to Warren Cross. The children. 4 minors recovered from the Miller Road residence, ages 6 through 11. They're being transported to the Children's Hospital in Fort Collins for medical evaluation. A 5th child was located at the Grayson facility. Darian closed his eyes, leaned against the porch railing. The wood was cold against his forearm, and he pressed into it, needing the discomfort, needing something physical to anchor him while the words sank through layers of adrenaline and rage and arrived at the place where they would live permanently. The 5th child, the one in the blanket. A 6-year-old boy, dehydrated, hypothermic. He's in stable condition. Stable. He'll recover, physically. The word physically carried the weight of everything she wasn't saying. The recovery that wouldn't be physical, the damage that wouldn't show on scans, the years of therapy and nightmares and flinching at doors that locked and hands that reached and the smell of storage units in winter. We recovered extensive digital evidence from the Grayson facility, Vasquez continued. Multiple devices, storage media, what appears to be a distribution network spanning several states. It's going to take weeks to process, but preliminary analysis indicates... She paused. Darian heard her breathe. A controlled breath. The kind agents take when the evidence they're describing exceeds even their trained tolerance for what humans do to each other. This is significant, Mr. Voss. We're looking at a network, not a lone operator. How many people? Too early to say, but Cross wasn't the top. There are layers above him. We're following the data. The DA, Vic. Under investigation. He resigned his position 2 hours ago, citing health reasons. We have agents at his residence. Darian opened his eyes, looked down the fire trail toward County Road 14, where the motorcycles had been. Most of the riders had dispersed through the morning, heading back to jobs and families and the ordinary machinery of lives lived between crises. A handful remained, Hatchett at Miller Road, 2 prospects running errands for Reeves, and Garrett Sull, who had ridden 400 miles through the night and was currently asleep in the cab of Tom's pickup truck in the yard, boots hanging out the open passenger door, snoring with the unapologetic volume of a man who had earned his rest. Mr. Voss. I need to address something. The club. Your involvement raises questions. A minor was transported without authorization. Evidence was obtained by an individual who entered a private facility without a warrant. The chain of custody on the audio recording, I understand. I'm not saying there will be charges. I'm saying there will be scrutiny. Your attorney should prepare. She already is. Good. A pause. Off the record. There is no off the record. No, there isn't. But I've been doing this for 14 years, and the cases I've worked, the ones that actually resulted in rescues, not just indictments, almost never started with a tip from a concerned citizen or a wellness check from family services. They started with someone who saw something wrong and refused to process it through channels they knew would fail. That's not a legal position. That's an observation. She hung up. Darian stood on the porch for a long time, watching the light change as the afternoon surrendered to early winter dusk, the shadows of the pine trees lengthening across the snow like fingers reaching for something they couldn't quite grasp. The next 72 hours moved in the strange, compressed rhythm of aftermath. Reeves filed motions. Vasquez's team expanded the investigation. The county family court, facing federal scrutiny, conducted an emergency review of every placement processed under DA Vic's streamlined program. 14 foster guardians were flagged for immediate review. 3 were arrested within 48 hours. The network that Warren Cross had described as interests that employed thousands and contributed to foundations was revealing itself as something far darker, a structure built to exploit the very system designed to protect the most vulnerable, using the language of compassion as camouflage for consumption. Mila stayed at Tom's cabin for the first 2 days while Reeves navigated the legal labyrinth of emergency custody. Darian stayed with her, not because anyone asked him to, because she asked him to in the way children ask, not with words but with the grip of her hand on his sleeve when he stood up, the direction of her gaze when he entered a room, the slight relaxation of her shoulders when she confirmed he was still there. On the second evening, Tom sat down across from Darian at the kitchen table. The dogs were sleeping by the stove. Mila was in the loft, drawing with a box of old colored pencils Tom had found in a drawer that hadn't been opened since his wife died 8 years ago. The scratching of pencil on paper drifted down through the floorboards like a small, persistent heartbeat. "You're going to have to let her go eventually," Tom said. Darian looked at his coffee. The surface trembled slightly from the vibration of the wood stove's fan. He watched the tremor and said nothing. "I don't mean abandon. I mean let the system take her where she needs to go. Hospital, foster family, wherever. You can't keep her on a couch in a cabin on a mountain with an old man and 2 dogs. The system put her in that house. Parts of it, other parts are taking it apart. That's not enough. It never is. But it's what exists, and you—" Tom pointed a finger at him, a blunt, arthritic finger with a nail that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. "You are not a foster parent. You are not a social worker. You're not a therapist. You're a man with a felony conviction, a motorcycle, and a guilt complex the size of this mountain. And that little girl up there deserves more than a man who's trying to save her to save himself." The words landed like a hand on a bruise. Darian looked up. Tom met his gaze without flinching, because Tom Oren had spent 71 years not flinching and wasn't about to start now. "I'm not trying to save myself. You are. You just don't know it. And that's fine. Most of the decent things men do in this world are done for selfish reasons wrapped in noble ones. Doesn't make them less decent, but it means you need to be honest about what you're carrying, because if you're not, you'll put that weight on her, and she's got enough weight already." Darian sat with that. The fire crackled. The pencil scratched. The dogs breathed in the slow, steady rhythm of animals who had never learned to carry more than the present moment. "I had a daughter," Darian said. "I know." "How?" "Cole told me. Years ago. Not the details, just enough." "Emma. Her name was Emma." Tom nodded, waited. "She was 3. Car seat in the back. My wife was driving. A truck crossed the line. The driver walked away. 14 months and parole." Darian's voice was flat, not controlled, empty. The flatness of a landscape that fire has passed through, where nothing grows yet, but the soil is still there, waiting. "I wasn't in the car. I was supposed to be. Club business. 20 minutes late, 20 minutes. You think if you'd been driving, I don't think anything. I know I wasn't there. I know they were. I know the math. Everything after that is just... He stopped, looked at his hands on the table, at the tattoo across his fingers. Hold fast. I held on to everything except them. Tom poured more coffee into both their mugs. The pot was nearly empty, the last of it thick and bitter, and he poured it anyway because wasting coffee was a sin he took more seriously than most. The girl upstairs isn't Emma, Tom said. You know that. I know that. And saving her won't bring Emma back. I know that too. So what is it? Darian looked toward the loft. The scratching had stopped. He could picture Mila lying on the mattress Tom had dragged up there, surrounded by pencil drawings of motorcycles and dogs, and tall figures in leather vests, falling asleep the way she had fallen asleep every night at the cabin, slowly, reluctantly, one eye open, still checking the door. It's the first time in 6 years I've felt anything that wasn't engine noise, he said, and I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it, just don't run from it. The third morning, Reeves called with news. Mila's mother, Sarah Chen, had been located at a psychiatric treatment facility in Pueblo. She had been admitted 7 months ago following a breakdown triggered by losing custody of her daughter, a custody loss facilitated by Vic's office, which had expedited the removal process and fast-tracked Mila's placement with Talman. The breakdown hadn't preceded the removal. It had been caused by it. Sarah Chen had fought the system, and the system had broken her, and then the system had used her brokenness as evidence that she was unfit. She's coherent, Reeves said. I spoke with her treatment team. She's been stable for 3 months. She's been requesting contact with Mila since August. Every request was denied by Vic's office. On what grounds? Therapeutic best interest, signed by a psychologist who, as of yesterday, is under investigation for falsifying evaluations in multiple foster placement cases connected to the network. Can she take Mila back? Not immediately. There's a process. Reunification requires court approval, home evaluation, supervised transition. But with Vic gone and the federal investigation providing context, the family court is expediting weeks, not months. Weeks. I know. In the meantime, Mila needs a temporary placement, a licensed emergency foster home. Not a stranger. That's not your decision. Reeves. Darian, listen to me. I've been doing this work for 22 years. I've seen what happens when men, good men, well-intentioned men, attach themselves to traumatized children without the training or the structure to support that relationship. It doesn't end well. Not for the men. Not for the children. I'm not trying to adopt her. I'm trying to make sure the next person she's placed with doesn't lock her door at night. Silence on the line. Then Reeves's voice, softer than he'd heard it. I'll advocate for a placement near the clubhouse, close enough that you can visit. The court will require supervision, background review, the whole apparatus. But I can push for proximity. Push hard. I always do. 10 days later, Mila was placed with a woman named Grace Holloway in Fort Collins, a retired school nurse, 63, who had been fostering children for 15 years and whose home had been vetted by Reeves personally, a process that involved 3 visits, 2 reference checks, and a 45-minute conversation during which Reeves asked questions that no standard evaluation form included because standard evaluation forms hadn't prevented Richard Talman. Darian drove to Fort Collins on the day of the placement, not on the Harley. Briggs lent him a truck, a battered Ford F-150 with a heater that worked intermittently and a passenger seat held together with duct tape. He brought nothing, no gifts, no speeches. Just himself, wearing clean jeans and a flannel shirt instead of the cut, because Reeves had told him the social worker overseeing the transition would be present, and first impressions mattered in a system that had already decided what kind of man he was based on his record. Grace Holloway's house was a single-story ranch on a quiet street with a chain-link fence, and a yard that in summer probably grew tomatoes and marigolds, but in January was just snow and brown grass and a plastic slide half buried in a drift. A social worker's sedan was parked in the driveway. Reeves's Audi was behind it. Darian sat in the truck for 4 minutes before going in. He gripped the steering wheel and breathed and looked at the house and thought about the last time he'd walked into a stranger's home to leave someone he cared about, which was never, because the people he'd cared about had been taken from him, not delivered by him. And the difference between those two acts was the difference between a wound and a surgery. One happens to you, the other you choose, and the choosing is worse because you can't blame the universe for a decision you made with your own hands. He went in. Mila was sitting on a couch in the living room with a glass of juice and a plate of cookies that she hadn't touched. Grace Holloway sat in an armchair nearby, not too close, not too far. The calibrated distance of a woman who understood that trust was earned in inches and demanded in miles. The social worker, a young woman with a clipboard and the exhausted eyes of someone carrying a caseload that had doubled since the federal investigation began, sat at the dining table taking notes. Mila saw Darian. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry. She set the juice on the coffee table and looked at him with those brown eyes that had aged decades in a week and said, "You came." Said I would. People say that. I know. He sat down beside her on the couch, not touching. Close enough that she could feel his weight shift the cushion. Close enough that his presence was physical, verifiable. Not a promise, but a fact. "This is Grace," Mila said, gesturing toward the older woman with the formality of a child introducing adults at a dinner party she didn't want to attend. "She has a cat." "I do," Grace said. "His name is Walter. He's hiding under the bed because he's not sure about the new arrangement either." Darian looked at Grace Holloway. Read her the way he read everyone. Eyes, hands, posture, the architecture of intention behind the surface of presentation. He saw tired kindness, genuine warmth, not performed. Hands that had held children and bandaged scrapes and signed report cards and done the invisible, unremarkable labor of caring for people who arrived in her life already damaged and left, hopefully, slightly less so. "She'll be safe here," Grace said quietly, meeting his gaze without challenge or reassurance, simply stating a fact the way Tom Oren stated facts, without embellishment, without the need for anyone to believe her because the truth didn't require belief. Darian nodded. He spent an hour, sat with Mila on the couch while she told Grace about the dogs at Tom's cabin, about the colored pencils, about the way the wood stove popped at night like someone knocking. She didn't talk about the house on Miller Road. She didn't talk about Talman or the blue door or the locked rooms. Those conversations would come later, in therapy, in the structured safety of professional environments designed to hold the weight of what children carry when the adults in their world fail them. For now, she talked about dogs and pencils and fire, and Darian listened, and the listening was enough. When he stood to leave, Mila grabbed his hand. "Will you come back?" "Every week." "Promise?" The word again, the same word from the diner, the same test, the same weight, the same terrible vulnerability of a child extending trust toward a man who had earned it only by refusing to leave when leaving would have been easier. "Every week," he said, "until you're tired of seeing me." "I won't get tired." "Then I won't stop." She let go of his hand. Slowly. One finger at a time. The same way she'd let go of his vest in the diner, except this time it wasn't because she expected him to fail. It was because she was learning, slowly, painfully, in the smallest possible increments, that letting go didn't always mean losing. Darian drove back to the clubhouse in Briggs's truck, with the heater cutting in and out, and the radio playing something country and forgettable, and the highway stretching ahead of him the way highways always stretched ahead of him, empty, open, leading somewhere that wasn't here. Except for the first time in 6 years, he didn't want to be somewhere else. He didn't want the road to swallow him. He didn't want the engine noise to replace the silence in his chest where his daughter's laugh used to live. He wanted to come back next week, and the week after, and the week after that. The investigation expanded through the winter and into the spring, 17 arrests across 3 states. Warren Cross was indicted on 46 federal counts. Richard Talman pleaded guilty to 12 and cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a sentence that would still keep him in a cell until he was old enough to forget what freedom tasted like. Dia Lawrence Vick was arrested at his home in February, found with a suitcase and a one-way ticket to a country without an extradition treaty, which told the court everything his attorneys spent months trying to deny. The foster placement program was dismantled, rebuilt, reviewed. New oversight requirements were implemented, requirements that Reeves helped draft, sitting in committee rooms with legislators who nodded and took notes and expressed outrage that arrived months late, but arrived nonetheless. 6 children were recovered. 6 lives returned to the trajectory they deserved, though trajectory is a generous word for the path a child walks after the kind of damage that no policy reform can undo and no arrest can repair. The recovery would take years. It would take patience and therapy and the slow, unglamorous work of teaching a child that doors are not always locked and hands are not always dangerous, and the adults who say, "I'll protect you," sometimes mean it. Mila's mother, Sarah Chen, was released from the treatment facility in March. The reunification process took 4 weeks of supervised visits, home evaluations, and court hearings that Reeves navigated with the precision of someone dismantling a bomb while building a bridge. On a Tuesday in early April, Mila walked into her mother's apartment in Fort Collins and saw her bedroom, a real bedroom, with her name on the door in wooden letters and a bookshelf, and a window that looked out onto a backyard where a dog could play if they ever got a dog, which Sarah had already promised they would because she had learned through her own long season of loss and reconstruction that promises are not things you make lightly, but they are things you keep. Darian wasn't there for the reunification. Reeves told him it was better that way. The moment belonged to Mila and her mother, and his presence, however well-intentioned, would have complicated the emotional geometry of a child returning to the one person she had been separated from by a system designed to erase the bond between them. He accepted this. It wasn't easy. Acceptance rarely is for men built to act. But the following Saturday, he rode the Harley to Fort Collins, parked on the street outside Sarah Chen's apartment, walked up the steps in his leather vest with the black wolves patches visible because he had decided, somewhere on the highway between the clubhouse and this door, that he was done performing versions of himself for the benefit of systems that had already judged him. He was what he was, and what he was had kept a little girl alive on the worst night of her life. Sarah opened the door, small, thin, dark-haired, with the careful posture of a woman rebuilding herself from the foundation up. She looked at his vest, at his scars, at his face. And then she did something that broke every expectation he had carried up the steps. She hugged him. Brief. Hard. The embrace of a woman who doesn't have words sufficient for the debt she's carrying and uses her arms instead. He stood rigid for a moment, the unaccustomed shock of contact from someone he hadn't braced for, and then his arms came up, slowly, and he held her back. 2 seconds. 3. Then she stepped away and wiped her eyes and said, "She's in the backyard." He walked through the apartment. Small, clean, warm. A kitchen that smelled like rice and something with ginger. A living room with a second-hand couch and a television, and on the wall above it, a crayon drawing in a cheap frame. A tall figure in a leather vest holding a small figure's hand beneath a sky that was all color and no shape. The way skies look to children who have seen enough darkness to know that light doesn't need to be organized to matter. Beneath the drawing, in letters that leaned left because Mila was left-handed and hadn't learned yet that the world was designed for people who leaned right, 2 words. My guardian. He stood in front of it for a long time. Long enough that the ginger smell from the kitchen intensified in the sounds from the backyard, a child's voice, the thump of a ball, a laugh that was small and uncertain and real, filtered through the window and reached him in the place where he kept the things he couldn't say out loud. He went outside. Mila was in the yard with a rubber ball, throwing it against the fence and catching it on the bounce. She saw him and stopped. The ball rolled into a patch of mud. She didn't chase it. "You came," she said. "Told you I would. It's been 2 weeks. I know, I'm sorry. There were things. It's okay." She picked up the ball, threw it against the fence, caught it. "Grace said you were helping the police with the other kids. Something like that. Are they okay?" He thought about the 6 children, about the hospital rooms and the therapy sessions and the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding trust in a species that had betrayed theirs. About the boy in the blanket, 6 years old, name of Marcus, who hadn't spoken a word in 3 weeks, and then one morning asked a nurse for orange juice, and the nurse had to leave the room because the sound of a child's voice requesting something as ordinary as orange juice after what he'd been through was more than her professional composure could hold. "They're getting there," Darian said. "Getting there isn't the same as okay." "No, it's not. But it's the direction." She threw the ball, caught it, threw it again. The rhythm of a child processing something too large for words, using her body to metabolize what her mind couldn't yet digest. "Are you okay?" she asked. The question surprised him. Not because a 7-year-old asked it. Mila had never been just a 7-year-old, not since the first moment in the diner, but because he didn't have a rehearsed answer. Every other question in his life he had answers for. Mission parameters, threat assessments, club business, legal strategy. He had spent 6 years building a vocabulary of competence and control that left no room for the question, "Are you okay?" Because answering it honestly required access to parts of himself he had sealed off with engine noise and highway miles, and the deliberate systematic refusal to feel anything that didn't serve a tactical purpose. "I'm getting there," he said. "Getting there isn't the same as okay." He looked at her. She looked at him. And between them, in the muddy yard of a small apartment in Fort Collins, on a Saturday afternoon in April, with a rubber ball in one hand and a patch of spring sunlight warming the top of her tangled brown hair, something passed that didn't need a name. Recognition. The mutual acknowledgement of two people who had walked through something together and come out the other side changed in ways they would spend years understanding. "Come on," Darian said. "Show me where you want to put the dog." Her face changed. The careful, guarded architecture of a child who had learned to manage expectations softened into something younger, brighter, closer to the girl she would have been if the world had treated her the way it should have from the start. "Mom said we could get one in the summer." "What kind?" "I don't know. A big one. Like Tom's." "German Shepherds are a lot of work." "I know, but they lean on you." She took his hand, led him across the yard to a corner by the fence where she had already planned the dog's area. A spot in the shade near the back door, close enough to the kitchen that the dog could smell dinner cooking and know it was home. Darian stood in the corner of that small yard and looked at the fence and the mud and the apartment building with its peeling paint and its secondhand furniture and its crayon drawing on the wall, and he felt something he had spent 6 years trying to outride on frozen highways and through mountain passes and across state lines that led nowhere. He felt present, not healed, not fixed, not redeemed. The fracture inside him was still there, would always be there. The permanent geography of a man who had lost his wife and daughter and would carry that loss in his bones for the rest of his life. But the fracture had been held, braced, by a child's hand on his arm in a cabin, by a mother's embrace in a doorway, by the sound of a rubber ball hitting a fence in a yard where a dog would live someday. He visited every Saturday, through spring and into summer. Sometimes he brought things, books that Briggs recommended for kids her age, a set of drawing pencils from an art supply store in Denver that he stood in for 20 minutes feeling enormous and out of place among college students and watercolor enthusiasts. Sometimes he brought nothing but himself, which Mila seemed to prefer because what she needed wasn't objects. It was consistency. The lived proof that someone could say, "I'll be here," and then be here, week after week, without conditions or expirations or the fine print of adult obligations that children learn to read before they learn to read actual words. On a Saturday in late June, Mila's 8th birthday, Sarah held a party in the park 2 blocks from the apartment, small, quiet. Sarah's sister drove up from Pueblo. Grace Holloway came. Briggs showed up with a first aid kit out of habit and a stuffed animal out of something softer. Tom Oren didn't come. Mountains were his terrain, not parks, but he sent a card with a photograph of his 2 dogs wearing bandanas, which Mila pinned to her bedroom wall beside the crayon drawing. Darian arrived last, parked the Harley at the curb, walked across the grass with his vest on and his boots leaving prints in the soft ground, and the particular self-consciousness of a man who has never attended a children's birthday party as anything other than a father. And the last time he did that was 4 years ago at a Chuck E. Cheese in Pueblo, where Emma blew out 3 candles and clapped and got frosting on her nose, and he took a photo that was still on a phone he kept in a drawer that he couldn't open. Mila ran to him, not walked, ran. The first time she had ever moved toward him rather than gripping his vest to keep him from moving away. She collided with his legs at full speed and wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face into the leather the same way she had in the diner, except this time she wasn't shaking. "You came," she said. And this time it wasn't a test. It was a greeting. "Happy birthday, kid." She let go, reached into the pocket of her shorts and pulled out a piece of paper, folded in quarters, the creases worn soft from handling. She unfolded it and held it up. A drawing. Colored pencils on white paper, the lines more controlled than the crayon sketches from the cabin. The proportions closer to accurate, the details sharper. A figure in a leather vest standing beside a motorcycle, a smaller figure beside him holding his hand, two dogs at their feet, a house in the background with a red door, not blue, red, a deliberate choice, the color of warmth and safety and doors that opened from the inside. And above them, in letters that had been written and erased and rewritten until they were straight, a word. Family. Darian took the drawing, held it, looked at it until the colored pencil lines blurred and the park and the sunlight and the grass and the sound of a child's birthday went soft at the edges, and he stood there in his leather and his scars and his permanent, irreparable damage and felt the fracture hold. Not close, not heal, hold. And that was enough. The Black Wolves rode that evening, not a mission, not a response, just a ride. 30 bikes on a summer highway with the windows of the sky wide open and the road unspooling west toward mountains that caught the last light and held it the way the living hold the memory of the lost, gently, tightly, with the understanding that holding is not the same as having, but it is the best that broken hands can do. Darian rode at the back of the formation, not point, not flank, last position, where he could see every rider ahead of him, every patch, and every scar, and every mile of road they'd earned, and where the wind hit him clean and unbroken and carried nothing but the smell of summer asphalt and pine, and the distant, vanishing echo of a child's voice saying a word that he would carry in the space where engine noise used to live. Family. The bikes rode west, the sun went down. The road kept going, so did they.